Centro de Investigaciones en Estructuras Microscópicas, CIMIC, de la Universidad de Costa Rica, les da la más cordial bienvenida al Simposio de Energías Renovables. Este simposio se organiza en el marco de la iniciativa Espacio Universitario de Estudios Avanzados, UCR-EA. El saludo muy cordial esta mañana a las autoridades que nos acompañan, el señor Rector en ejercicio de la Universidad de Costa Rica, doctor Carlos Araya Leandro, al ingeniero José Francisco Aguilar Pereira, miembro del Consejo Universitario, al director del Centro de Investigaciones de Estructuras Microscópicas, CIMIC, doctor Adrián Pinto Tomás, y por supuesto a los expositores invitados, a todas y todos ustedes que nos acompañan. Iniciamos esta actividad con las palabras del director del Centro de Investigaciones en Estructuras Microscópicas, doctor Adrián Pinto Tomás.
Muchas gracias. Estimado rector en ejercicio, doctor Carlos Araya Leandro, estimado ingeniero José Francisco Aguilar, miembro del Consejo Universitario, estimado doctor Tim Donohue, director del Instituto de Bioenergía de los Grandes Lagos, estimado doctor Michael Radini, director del Instituto de Energía de Wisconsin, estimados conferencistas, estimado público presente acá en la sala y también público que nos sigue a través de la internet acá en Costa Rica y la región centroamericana, muchas gracias por estar acá. Hoy tenemos una audiencia que representa los diferentes sectores de nuestro país. Tenemos 22 instituciones acá entre las 100 personas que nos acompañan. Tenemos las 4 universidades públicas, la Universidad de Costa Rica, la UNA, la Universidad Nacional, el Instituto Tecnológico, la Universidad Estatal a Distancia. Tenemos también estudiantes de estas universidades. Tenemos un estudiante de Panamá, un estudiante que está en Stuttgart en este momento. Bueno, en este momento está en Costa Rica, pero busca el doctorado allá. Nos acompañan los directores del CENIBIOTI en la UTEC, parte del Senat. Nos acompañan representantes también del Potencial, del INAE, de Recope, del ICE, empresas del sector energía, otras instituciones como la OET, el ICAFE, por supuesto la Universidad de Wisconsin, y contamos también con el apoyo de la Cámara de Industrias. Además tenemos algunos agricultores y consultores independientes en la audiencia. Pues, como pueden ver, es una audiencia bastante diversa, lo cual nos enorgullece y nos hace muy contentos, y también nos muestra que el tema de energía es un gran desafío, y es un desafío a todo nivel, a nivel del individuo, de las pequeñas decisiones que tomamos todos los días, a nivel de la universidad, nuestra comunidad, para muchos de los que estamos acá, a nivel del país y a nivel del planeta. Y un desafío de tal magnitud requiere de trabajo en equipo, no hay otra manera de resolverlo. Requiere de la participación del sector académico, requiere de la participación del gobierno, requiere de la participación del sector privado. Si no nos ponemos de acuerdo, no vamos a lograr salir adelante. Por fortuna tenemos representantes de todos estos sectores acá, así que vamos bien. Para estos grandes desafíos también se necesita un liderazgo, y la Universidad de Costa Rica, por su historia y su posición en la región, ha asumido este liderazgo ante grandes desafíos, y esa es la filosofía por la cual se creó el Espacio Universitario de Estudios Avanzados, UCREA por sus siglas, como un marco multi y transdisciplinario, innovador e internacional de investigación de alto nivel, con el objetivo general de dinamizar la organización y actividades de la UCR que le permitan asumir el liderazgo en el país y en la región. Les leo un fragmento de la resolución que crea el instituto. Razonando por qué la Universidad de Costa Rica, la Rectoría dice que el desarrollo institucional de Costa Rica y sobre todo el propio desarrollo de la Universidad de Costa Rica se prestan para que en este país y en nuestra institución surja una iniciativa que procure generar espacios de estudio, pensamiento y elaboración de propuestas que partan de una perspectiva integradora hacia temas y problemas complejos de interés común en la región. Si nos están viendo en Centroamérica, esperamos que sí. Buenas noticias para todos. Es un esfuerzo integrador. De hecho, uno de sus objetivos es constituirse en un incubador de ideas, en el sentido de facilitar el pensar cosas que no han sido previamente pensadas. UCREA debe ser un lugar de encuentro y espacio de discusión e intercambio para el personal académico de la UCR, desbordando las actividades puramente disciplinarias, en interacción permanente con académicos y académicas de todo el mundo, con un ámbito temático igualmente abierto a las artes, las ciencias naturales, las humanidades y las ciencias sociales. El tema de energía es realmente un tema que atañe a todas estas áreas. Es en el marco de UCREA, entonces, donde se desarrolla esta actividad, que en palabras de la señora vicerrectora, si bien es cierto que en esta actividad los temas a tratar son puntuales, uno de los objetivos de este encuentro es sentar las bases para una discusión más amplia sobre el tema de energía, desde la UCR y a nivel nacional, respondiendo a una demanda propia del país, pero igualmente de cara a los retos del planeta y de los principios por un desarrollo inclusivo y sostenible. Que este sea el marco para acordar reuniones, coloquios de discusión y actividades similares en esta área. También, nos dice la vicerrectora, esperamos encontrar sinergias propias de las agendas de investigación que permitan iniciar proyectos conjuntos en el corto plazo. Desde el punto de vista logístico de la organización de esta actividad, contamos con el apoyo del CIEMIC, el Centro de Investigación en Estructuras Microscópicas, que es un centro multi y transdisciplinario con una historia muy amplia de cooperación, tanto a nivel nacional como internacional. Nosotros ponemos a disposición nuestra experiencia en investigación, cooperación internacional y equipo de alta tecnología para análisis ultraestructurales de materiales biológicos y no biológicos con potencial aplicación en generación de energías renovables. Es decir, estamos a su servicio de la comunidad nacional e internacional como un integrante más de este equipo para tratar de atacar este enorme desafío que es la sostenibilidad energética. Dentro de la organización, ya como decimos, en las trincheras de este evento, hemos contado con el apoyo de la Red para el Descubrimiento de Biomoléculas con Potencial Aplicación en Salud, Energía y Agricultura, red coordinada por la máster Catalina Murillo, la asistente de la red, Mariel Víquez, y otros componentes, estudiantes e investigadores de la red nos están apoyando y nos han apoyado en la realización de esta actividad. Así que sinceramente les agradezco por toda su ayuda. Esperamos que disfruten esta actividad. Hemos preparado un programa que nos permitirá conocer y discutir el panorama de investigación, tanto en Estados Unidos como en Costa Rica, en el área de energías renovables. Nuestros visitantes, el doctor Tim Donohue, el doctor Michael Corradini, dirigen institutos de energía en el estado de Wisconsin, pionero en estas investigaciones en la Unión Americana, y debido al éxito que han tenido en sus gestiones, ahora también son voces de autoridad en la estructura federal, es decir, en el gobierno de la Unión Americana. Gracias a su trabajo arduo y sus resultados, sus consejos son escuchados. La experiencia que ellos han tenido, la historia de sus centros, creo que será muy enriquecedora para nosotros el día de hoy. Tenemos también la presencia de investigadores de las universidades públicas, demostrando la investigación a alto nivel que se hace en nuestro país. Tenemos también la presencia de la institución líder en electricidad, no solo en Costa Rica, sino también en la región, el Instituto Costarricense de Electricidad, el IEEE. Tendremos su expositor y también su presencia en la mesa redonda que será moderada por el analista ambiental y consultor ambiental Agustín Rodríguez de la Cámara de Industrias, para que nos obligue a aterrizar, ¿verdad? Poner los pies en la tierra, y representando ese tercer componente de la triple hélice, gobierno, academia e industria, que tiene que unirse para trabajar en equipo para atacar este problema. Luego de las charlas tendremos un espacio para preguntas, pero la actividad se cerrará con una mesa redonda. Entonces, si por cuestiones de tiempo no pueden preguntar a algún expositor, por favor también tengan la confianza de acercarse a ellos en ambos cafés o el almuerzo, o de guardar su pregunta o realizarla durante la discusión de la mesa redonda. Es un auditorio, como vemos, que nos obliga a estar juntos. Esperamos una participación muy activa de ustedes, también como componentes de este trabajo en equipo. Sin duda, para lograr alcanzar nuestra meta de sostenibilidad energética, cada uno con motivación debe aportar sus capacidades y experticia como única estrategia para lograr este objetivo común. Si nos unimos, podemos salir adelante. Muchas gracias y espero que disfruten esta actividad.
Seguidamente, el mensaje del señor Rector en ejercicio, el doctor Carlos Araya Leandro.
Muy buenos días. El doctor Adrián Pinto, director del Centro de Investigación en Estructuras Microscópicas, ingeniero Francisco Aguilar, miembro del Consejo Universitario. Un cordial saludo y la bienvenida a nuestros invitados internacionales, el doctor Donohue, director del Centro de Investigaciones en Bioenergía de los Grandes Lagos en la Universidad de Wisconsin, y el doctor Michael Corradini, director del Instituto de Energía y del Instituto de Sistemas Nucleares de Wisconsin. Por supuesto, un cordial saludo a las y los expositores, a las investigadoras, investigadores, estudiantes que nos acompañan esta mañana, a todas y todos, muy buenos días. Al médico español Santiago Ramón y Cajal, conocido por compartir el Premio Nobel de Medicina a principios del siglo pasado por sus investigaciones en células nerviosas, se le atribuye la frase que dice: las ideas no duran mucho, hay que hacer algo con ellas. En este año que recién empieza, me gustaría que cada persona que forma parte de nuestra comunidad universitaria pudiera hacer suyas estas palabras. ¿Cuántas veces no somos nosotros mismos la principal barrera para pasar de la idea a la acción? Pero así como podemos autosabotear nuestras expectativas, también podemos tomar la decisión de llevar esas ideas a proyectos concretos. Así es como nacen grandes obras, desde acciones individuales e incluso desde países relativamente pequeños como el nuestro. En el Simposio de Energías Renovables que celebramos este día, daremos a conocer una serie de proyectos exitosos que han nacido gracias a una idea justamente. La semilla de cambiar el modelo de generación de energía hacia el uso de fuentes renovables germinó sin duda alguna en suelos áridos, poco favorables para el surgimiento de apoyos e iniciativas. Sin embargo, poco a poco más y más personas se han comprometido con esta idea y con ella han crecido robustos emprendimientos que nos acercan cada vez más a esta meta de sostenibilidad. Nuestro planeta está cambiando por causa de acciones que los seres humanos hemos emprendido desde el siglo XIX y somos nosotros y las futuras generaciones las que tendrán que aprender a convivir con estos cambios. Por ello, más que sentarnos a esperar las consecuencias de acciones pasadas, emprendimientos que favorezcan el desarrollo sostenible no solo velan por nuestro crecimiento, sino también por el bienestar de todo el planeta. En algún momento de la historia de la humanidad, la ciencia y la tecnología tuvieron increíbles avances orientados a la comodidad de las personas. Hoy no podríamos concebirlo sin un enfoque de sostenibilidad que incluya todas las formas de vida con las que compartimos nuestro planeta y considerando prosperidad para las generaciones que vendrán. En la reciente 21ª Conferencia de las Partes, celebrada en diciembre anterior en París, quedó en evidencia la necesidad de que todas las ideas en torno a la adaptación y la mitigación del cambio climático sean puestas en práctica a nivel internacional. Los 195 países que firmaron el acuerdo para reducir las emisiones globales y ayudar a que el mundo se adapte al cambio climático se comprometieron, como estoy seguro todas y todos ustedes lo saben, alcanzar un pico mundial de emisiones de gases de efecto invernadero cuanto antes, a fin de intentar reducir el promedio global de incremento de temperatura. Los impactos asociados al cambio climático continuarán por cientos de años, aunque las emisiones de gases de efecto invernadero se detengan. El riesgo de cambios irreversibles y abruptos aumenta con la magnitud del incremento de temperatura, y en este sentido, los combustibles fósiles como el petróleo o el carbón crean emisiones de gases de efecto invernadero que contribuyen al calentamiento global. Por ende, es necesaria la búsqueda de nuevas alternativas limpias como lo son las energías renovables. Su uso es nuestra nueva responsabilidad social colectiva, no solo para con las personas, sino para con el planeta. Costa Rica es un país que se ha distinguido por la generación de electricidad basada mayoritariamente en fuentes renovables. Las múltiples iniciativas que hoy serán expuestas son fruto del esfuerzo a nivel nacional que se ha posicionado con los años en nuestra región y que contribuyen a fortalecer nuestro compromiso país a favor del medio y del desarrollo sustentable. Por este motivo es de trascendental importancia crear un espacio de discusión para exponer los distintos proyectos y esfuerzos que está realizando el país desde diferentes instituciones estatales, tales como la Universidad de Costa Rica, la Universidad Nacional, el Instituto Tecnológico de Costa Rica o el Instituto Costarricense de Electricidad. Para poder fomentar la creatividad, la innovación y la producción, es necesario socializar las iniciativas, pues esto además puede conseguir aliados estratégicos para su consecución óptima. Con este simposio, justamente, nuestro objetivo es poder evidenciar esfuerzos y casos exitosos en el aumento de la generación eléctrica a partir de fuentes renovables, que además son la vía para alcanzar la meta de ser un país carbono neutro en el año 2021. En este espacio universitario de estudios avanzados de la Universidad de Costa Rica, que como bien lo señalaba el doctor Pinto, denominamos como UCREA, es de vital importancia contar con los expertos Timothy Donohue, director del Centro de Investigación en Bioenergía de los Grandes Lagos en la Universidad de Wisconsin, y el doctor Michael Corradini, director del Instituto de Energía y del Instituto de Sistemas Nucleares de Wisconsin. Esto por cuanto su experiencia nos proporcionará una visión externa de lo que estamos haciendo en Costa Rica y de las opciones que tenemos para aprender de sus aciertos y errores. Esta es la mejor forma de transmitir el conocimiento, que es la herramienta de la academia para forjar criterios y preparar a nuestros futuros profesionales. Para la Universidad de Costa Rica es un honor contar con la presencia de los señores Donohue y Corradini, así como de los expertos de nuestras universidades estatales y del Instituto Costarricense de Electricidad. Estos intercambios son los que hacen crecer y evidencian nuestro compromiso con el desarrollo científico y tecnológico de nuestro país. Tenemos mucho potencial que se está gestando principalmente a nivel de la academia, y el camino por recorrer no es sencillo. Desde los Estados Unidos de América, la ruta trazada incluyó representantes de los sectores académico, industrial y gubernamental, y juntos lograron establecer la estrategia a seguir para fortalecer ese compromiso estatal. Aprovechemos esta oportunidad para aprender del conocimiento generado y sepamos mostrar a nuestros invitados lo mucho que Costa Rica puede aportar al desarrollo sostenible regional mediante la planificación y la gestión adecuada de los recursos. América Latina, tan desigual en tantos aspectos, requiere la intervención de personas, de grupos, de grandes colectivos, de instituciones y al final de cuentas de países que se comprometan a hacerla cada vez más equitativa, más justa y transparente. La ciencia y la tecnología tienen las herramientas para hacerlo, empezando por aquellas ideas que pueden surgir de espacios como este. Nuestro país es líder en la región y tenemos el potencial para escalar estos proyectos. Todo está en la mente, como quizás se refería Ramón y Cajal. No esperemos que las ideas se empolven, hagamos algo con ellas, pero procuremos que sea en función del bien común. Les deseo muchos éxitos en este simposio. Muy buenos días y muchas gracias.
Y de esta manera damos por inaugurado el Simposio de Energías Renovables. Le agradecemos al señor Rector en ejercicio, el doctor Carlos Araya Leandro, por su presencia y participación esta mañana. Don Carlos debe retirarse para seguir cumpliendo compromisos propios de su agenda. Nosotros continuamos con las charlas programadas y para ello le cedo nuevamente la palabra al doctor Adrián Pinto.
Muchas gracias. Es un honor para mí presentar la siguiente charla, una conferencia titulada From Field to Fuels and Chemicals, que será dictada por el doctor Timothy Donohue, quien es el director del Centro de Investigación en Bioenergía de los Grandes Lagos en Wisconsin, Estados Unidos. El doctor Donohue Es director e investigador principal de este instituto en la Universidad de Wisconsin. Investiga las vías genéticas que utilizan los microorganismos para la generación de biomasa o biocombustibles a partir de luz solar. Ha ocupado 10 cargos de presidencia y dirección. Actualmente es director del Industrial Biotechnology and Bioenergy Alliance Board y del Norwich Research Park. Y este año cumplió su periodo como presidente de la Sociedad Americana de Microbiología, ASM. Ha recibido 8 premios y es miembro electo de la Academia para el Avance de la Ciencia de los Estados Unidos desde el 2009. Cuenta con más de 136 publicaciones en revistas indexadas. Además, fue editor de las revistas Microbiology y Biofuels y es revisor de varias revistas de gran relevancia como Nature, The Plant Cell, entre otras. Actualmente forma parte del consejo editorial de la revista Journal for Bacteriology y del comité ejecutivo del Instituto de Energía de Wisconsin. Agradecemos la presencia del Dr. Donohue y le cedemos la palabra. Muchas gracias.
So let me just begin by thanking Adrian and the president of the university for joining us today, as well as all of the experts from the government and the industry. It is an honor for me to be here representing my university and telling you about some of the things that are going on in Great Lakes Bioenergy. I have some old friends in this audience, and it's good to come down and connect with them, but it's also equally good, if not better, sorry Adrian, to connect and make new friends, because this is all a visit about making new friends as well and making new connections where we can work together to solve the grand societal problems that you heard about today. So what I'm going to do today is tell you about work that's been going on in Great Lakes Bioenergy and why we think this has been a successful model for doing sustainable conversion of plant biomass into fuels and chemicals. So, since I'm an academic, this is the outline for my lecture. What I'm going to do today is try to introduce you to the scale and complexity of powering the energy grid and the efforts that are going on in my center and very briefly on the UW-Madison campus to diversify how we generate energy in the United States. I will use Great Lakes Bioenergy as a case study or an example of what we're doing. Mike will follow up and talk more about other non-biological energy generating systems. So as an introduction, Great Lakes Bioenergy is focused on converting the non-edible part of plant biomass into fuels and chemicals. By that, technically, that's called lignocellulosic biomass. That's different than the cornstarch or the sugarcane glucose that you hear about a lot that's being used to power cars by making ethanol and other things like that. I'm going to hopefully quickly illustrate to you some of the benefits, I think, that have come out of the interdisciplinary team-based approach that we've been able to execute with U.S. government funding. And then I'm going to give you some case studies or examples of advances we've made that we think are beginning to move us closer to actually having the ability to make fuels and chemicals in a sustainable way from lignocellulosic plant biomass. So that's the roadmap for the lecture. So to go back and put all of this work in context, this is a graph that I've stolen actually from the U.S. Department of Energy that looks at the amount of energy produced in the United States going back well over 100 years now. And you can see several things. It's constantly growing. We need more and more energy as the population has grown and society matures. And you can see at about the turn of the last century, fossil fuel started to become a major player in the energy sector in the US, and that component of the total has increased with time, to the point that at the turn of the last century, in 2000, 80% of the energy produced in the United States comes from fossil fuels, and just a little fraction up here in renewables. That would be the sum of solar and wind and geothermal, and there's a little hydro piece down here that's different. Mike will have more to say about it later. So we are still very dependent, obviously, in the United States on fossil fuel as the century turned. Many times when I give this talk and people see that slide, they want to know, how are we today? Well, this is the closest data set that I have from 2012. We are still at about 75% fossil fuel if you add up natural gas, coal, and crude oil. And biomass, although there have been increases, is still only 5%. So we've made some progress, but we have a large area to grow this, either by reducing fossil fuel use or just keeping fossil fuel the same and growing the amount of these renewable technologies that could be added to that energy piece. So in order to do that and to diversify the energy grid, the university several years ago realized this was a grand societal challenge that we were equipped to help solve. If we could bring like-minded and interdisciplinary teams of people together under an institute roof, and they created something called the Wisconsin Energy Institute that Mike runs as a catalyst to move us forward in energy. In this institute are programs to create, integrate, and transfer knowledge to the private sector in energy resources, technology, and sustainability, spanning everything from biomass to automotive and transportation, to batteries, to electricity, and actually to policy, because we know very well that the best technology might not be adopted without the proper policy instruments and government support to help enable moving that technology from my lab out to business. So Mike's going to have a lot more to say about the Energy Institute and many of the things that are going on. As I said, I am going to focus on Great Lakes Bioenergy, which really encompasses activities in these two parts of these diagrams, and that is the production of technologies to use plant biomass to make fuels, and now more and more chemicals to replace fossil fuels. Great Lakes Bioenergy is one of 3 bioenergy centers that were established by the U.S. Department of Energy in 2007. We are housed at UW-Madison, but we also have a major partnership with Michigan State University. So we like to say we are a center that is geographically anchored by the Great Lakes region of the United States, hence the name Great Lakes Bioenergy. But we do have partners at all of these other red triangles around the U.S. and actually one in Canada. So we have partners at 6 other sites in the U.S. and Canada. We are in our 9th year of funding, and we are programmed to receive about $265 million US from the DOE, and we have commitments from the state, the campus, and the Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation, or WARF, our technology transfer partner, for another approximately $28 million. So about 10% of our funding comes from outside the federal government. To put what we're going to talk about in perspective, this is how we currently make ethanol for the transportation sector. In the U.S., we use corn to get glucose, which is so-called clean sugar, simple glucose that can then be fermented to make ethanol. In Brazil and other parts of Central America and sites around the world, sugarcane is used instead of corn, but you wind up with glucose and it's fermented into ethanol. We are not working in this space at all in Great Lakes Bioenergy. We are developing technology for tomorrow to use the non-edible part of biomass instead of cornstarch or sugarcane to make technology available where we can pre-treat this difficult to process material with chemicals and heat, convert it into hydrolysates is what we call them. If you were making wine, this would be a juice. If you were making beer, this would be a malt, which can then be, which is a much more heterogeneous mixture of sugars and other compounds that can then be converted by fermentation or chemical conversion or even hybrid technologies into fuels like ethanol, hydrocarbons, and chemicals. We started working mostly on ethanol to convince ourselves that we knew how to do this, and more as time has gone on, we've shifted from ethanol to hydrocarbons and chemicals, because those are fuels that will work across the transportation sector, in diesel as well as aviation, as well as cars. The other reason we've done this is illustrated on this slide. This slide is again something I've stolen from the US Department of Energy, and it shows what a biorefinery does with a barrel of fuel that comes in to its front door. It shows that they make about 50% of their value, their profit, on transportation fuels by converting about 75% of the volume into gasoline, diesel, or jet fuel. But they actually make another 50% of their value by making specialty chemicals. So we think a biorefinery of tomorrow will work like an oil refinery of today if we can develop products that are used in the transportation sector as well as products that are used in the chemical industry. Whether the split will be 50-50 based on volume, time and technology will tell, but this is our approach. So we see a future that has plant biomasses providing us with a new source of fuels and chemicals. And you can take the plant biomasses and put them in two general categories in the United States. One is so-called crop residues, and I'll illustrate that with corn. So instead of using corn kernels or corn starch, we want to use corn stalks or stover or corn cobs. So excess agricultural material is crop residue. The other is so-called dedicated bioenergy crops. Things that a farmer or we would grow specifically to make fuels and chemicals, not for grain to feed animals or people. And examples of that are poplar or perennials, native prairies, okay? So now let me tell you a little bit about what we've managed to accomplish in Great Lakes Bioenergy since we started. So if you were the US Department of Energy or a taxpayer asking me, what have you done with all of this taxpayer money, one of the things I would tell you is since 2007, we have published over 850 papers. That's almost 2 every week. We are very proud of that number. We are particularly proud of the fact that 75% of those papers are collaborations. So Dr. Kiley is here as another member of our center. I have many papers published with Dr. Kiley. I publish very few papers on my own. These papers have been cited over 30,000 times, which is actually a very large number when you consider that they are not very old. The oldest paper is 6 years old, okay? We are funded by the government not just to do fun academic science, but to enable the formation of a new industry. So we need to generate knowledge that will form the legs of the stool for new technology. So we have over 120 invention disclosures and 130 patents. That averages 1 per month in the last several years. And if I go to the US Patent Office statistics, the number of patents that we have per dollar that we've gotten from the government is 50% more than what we would expect. We think that's because of the importance of this problem and the team approach that we've taken to solve it. We've already got approximately 40 licenses where companies have come to us and want to evaluate what they're doing so they can commercialize it. And 2 new startup companies with venture capital funding have come out of technology from Great Lakes Bioenergy. So I think there's evidence here that this approach of team science has been very successful. Especially for this audience, I wanted to show this slide because it shows that in the last year, we have published papers with academics and laboratories in 24 different countries around the world. Not by sending money there, but by us identifying experts that can help us solve a problem and collaborating. Or by experts in other countries coming to us and seeing that we have tools and expertise and wanting to collaborate with us. So again, to resonate with the points that we heard earlier, we are here to meet people in Costa Rica and to build bridges and to try and help each other solve problems when we can by working together. I would love to see Costa Rica on this map in the next year or two, okay? So now let me shift a little from the high-level activities that we've been doing and what we've gotten done organizationally to the science, to see where there are touch points that we can work together. So if you take everything that Great Lakes Bioenergy is trying to do in improvement of plants and converting those plant materials into hydrolysates by deconstruction for conversion into fuels, they really, it all separates down into two knowledge gaps that we're trying to fill. One is the sustainable production of crops with desirable biofuel traits, and the second is the energy efficient conversion of biomass into fuels and chemicals. In this diagram, we put sustainability at the center because that drives a lot of our thinking. We want crops that are going to be good stewards on the land and have good carbon and greenhouse gas footprints, and we want conversion technologies that maximize the amount of valuable products we get from the hydrolysates that are being fed to microbes and the chemists. Just like an oil refinery gets value from every drop in that barrel, we want to produce value from every gram of carbon that we can in these biomass samples. That will drive economic acceptance of this technology. So I'm going to now take a very high-level, quick overview into some of the types of programs that we're looking at. So first, let me talk about what we're doing in our efforts for sustainable production of crops. So in the United States, we know that the types of crops that will be used to make fuels and chemicals will vary based on the region and the ecosystem and possibly even the engine, fuels, and co-products that want to be developed in that region. And these range from things like corn, we have a lot of that in the Midwest, which are denoted here as low diversity because a farmer grows one crop, corn, and high input. He or she needs to put a lot of fertilizer on the land, ranging all the way up to high diversity, low input systems like native prairies, which could provide biomass for conversion into fuels and chemicals. So we are evaluating different cropping systems across this spectrum, looking to see what we can do from crops down here that provide us with crop residue, as I mentioned before, and up here is more closer to the dedicated bioenergy crops. So let me give you one slide to high level some bottom lines from that work from our sustainability group. Over the last 7 years, we have been monitoring the performance of 7 crops at 2 sites in the Midwest. Here is an aerial photo of one of our agricultural station plots, and the different patches show different cropping systems. As our agronomy scientists and sustainability scientists look at this, they measure soil, geochemistry, water use, they measure rhizosphere microbes, biodiversity, insects as well as animals and birds, carbon, nitrogen, and greenhouse gas features, and we track how much fertilizer needs to go in for inputs, what the productivity, and what we would do to process that material. And the take-home message from that After 7 years, if you look in Wisconsin, where we have a major site like this, and in Michigan, is that the biomass yields for perennial crops is comparable to that for grain. This is a very important finding. It might be simple, but when we started, many of the critics said, you will never be able to produce enough biomass with non-grain crops to keep a farmer happy, so that he or she can make money by doing cellulosic biofuels. So you can see here in Wisconsin, this is the amount of biomass that you make in corn stalks. This is what you get in grain. And if you draw this line across, you can see that many of these cropping systems produce as much biomass as corn would. And it's even better in Michigan, and if you want to know the differences, I can tell you that Wisconsin is more fertile land than Michigan, and perennials do better on non-fertile land. That's my microbiology simple explanation. But perennials need less input, less fertilizer, which is an energy cost and a greenhouse gas cost, and provide better ecosystem services. They're better habitats for squirrels and birds and native animals that are going to want to nest as you do this. So these practices are very important to think about as the country thinks about shifting into using cellulosic biomass to make profits from it. The other part of the system we've been looking at in the US is non-agricultural land, so-called marginal land. So this shows a map of 10 states in the upper Midwest region, and it's color-coded. All you need to know is that yellow is area where people grow crops for grain. The green is native prairie. The darker colors is forestry. So this is land that is prime for use for biomass processing, even though it will never be used for production agriculture farming. So we have modeled the productivity of marginal lands across these 10 states at a reasonable scale. And from that model, we have shown that we could identify 35 sites, each one covered with a circle, that would provide sufficient biomass for a 30 million gallon per year biorefinery if you take an 80-kilometer radius across the center of every one of those circles. If we could do this, if we could develop the technology and develop businesses that wanted to do this, biomass from 45% of this marginal land could meet 25% of the country's future transportation targets from lignocellulosic biomass. So this, again, is a very important study that we are just starting, and we want to continue to refine these numbers because it shows the potential to make valuable products from land that is currently not being used for agriculture in a way that would not disturb the ecosystem. So now let me move a little more into what we're doing in this area to modify plants genetically so that they would be better material to convert into fuel. So one of the compounds we've devoted a lot of effort onto is lignin, which is schematically shown here. This is a polymer of aromatic residues, and this is a big problem and a benefit I'll come back to in the end of my talk, but for now it's a problem. Because lignin is what is holding the plant sugars together in plant biomass. And in order to get at that sugars, we need to remove the lignin. Because of the way plants build lignin, they're held together with ethers, and you need very high temperatures and need a strong acid or base to take it apart. That's an energy and an economic problem. So one of our investigators said, what if we could put more easily cleavable linkages into this polymer, esters, instead of ethers? That would reduce the energy and the acid that you would need to remove the lignin. Well, the approach to do that would be to incorporate these different monomers into a growing lignin chain. We knew that chemically, but we didn't know how to do that genetically. We had to identify a gene that would make enough of this substrate, put that gene in the right place in the plant, and have it incorporate lignin. So how do we do that in Great Lakes Bioenergy? So we do that using genomics. So we start out with an idea for zip lignin, and we know there's a native plant, Angelica sinensis, for the botanists in the room. This is a Chinese medicinal herb that makes 20% of this zip lignin as a native product in its roots. So we went into those roots, we isolated messenger RNA, we looked for highly expressed genes that looked like they could produce this compound. We identified candidates, we produced them in Arabidopsis, a model system, and showed it had the right enzyme activity. So then we say, now let's go to a real biomass plant. And we moved it first into poplar with our collaborators in British Columbia. And we can show that in these transgenic poplar plants, with the same pre-treatment that gives us this much sugar from a wild-type plant, we get more sugar per plant with these zip lignin poplar plants. So the technology really works. We are now taking that technology out of the nursery into the field to see how these plants would survive in an open environment with microbes and pests and everything else. And we're moving it into Brachypodium, which is another perennial plant that would work very well across the upper Midwest. So we're moving zip lignin idea to scale other crops. And in a minute, I'm going to tell you what we do to process biomass. We're now bulking up enough of this material to see how the single genetic change influences our ability to process it into fuels and chemicals downstream. So I'm not going to go through all the same details, but we've taken a similar genomic approach to modify other processes in plants that we think will make them better biofuel crops. So if you look at the sugar polysaccharides that we want to get at in plants, there's a little bit of six carbon sugars and a lot of 5 carbon sugars. Microbiologists know that microbes prefer to ferment 6 carbon sugars. They don't like 5 carbon sugars. So 5 carbon sugars are like broccoli, 6 carbon sugars are like ice cream. My bugs like ice cream, they don't like broccoli. So we have gone in using the same approach and identified genes where we can now create plants that have more easily digestible 6 carbon sugars in their polysaccharides. Using a similar approach, we're beginning studies to produce hydrocarbons in plants so that a biorefinery could make oils in plants, but also make products from the sugars and the lignin. The approach to do that is to make this novel acetylated triacylglycerol that has a glycerol backbone and 2 long-chain fatty acids, but one is an acetyl group instead of a 3rd long-chain fatty acid like a normal triacylglycerol. That single change makes a lipid that has a different freeze point, that makes it available to use as directly as number 4 diesel without taking the fatty acids off from the glycerol. How do you do that? We knew that this plant, burning bush, accumulated acetylated triacylglycerol in its leaves. We identified the gene for that enzyme. We showed it had that activity in yeast. We've now moved it into camelina in seeds and are actually producing enough of this oil so that our collaborators in the engine center can burn it to see how it works in a real engine. Another major initiative is to improve crop yields of dedicated bioenergy crops. So this shows an example with switchgrass, where colleagues in our center for years had been trying to get more switchgrass, higher switchgrass yields in the upper Midwest. Because we have a shorter growing season, the yield is low. In the lower part of the country where the growing season is longer, you get a higher yield. And before genomics came along, they were making progress, but it was going to take them almost 100 years to get to their goal. With the advent of genomics that we've been able to bring to this project and the Joint Genome Institute, we can now produce, these are wild type switchgrass stands that give you low yields. These are our best stands now. We can now get a threefold increase in the rate of yield improvement, and we think with no further improvement from here on out, we can get to that target 25 years faster than we would before. But if we continue on this trajectory, we will get there even faster. Time will tell. This is by traditional breeding. This is not a transgenic approach. So that's another advantage. Because a lot of people, myself included, might have strong concerns about developing transgenic traits in perennial crops. This is a native breeding, genome-informed approach. So that illustrates some of the things we've been doing to sustainably produce biomass. Let me now move on and talk to you about a second major activity, which is the energy efficient conversion of biomass into fuels and chemicals. So the first thing I'm going to do is talk about some of the activities that we have in the center to deconstruct biomass, to get it ready for chemical or biological conversion into fuels and chemicals. So if you think about this, you can think of this little pattern of blue, yellow, and gray material as plant biomass, and we treat it with some kind of a pretreatment. This shows alkaline, just for an example. And out of this could come two streams, a sugar stream in blue and yellow, and a lignin stream in gray. The lignin stream is a polymer of aromatics. The sugar stream is a polymer of 6 and 5 carbon sugars, again in blue and yellow, like I illustrated before. So if we make these polymers, there are some pretreatments where you need enzyme mixtures. There are other pretreatments that I call next generation pretreatments that we have actually developed since funding that bypass enzymes. So let me give you a little bit of a highlight of what we've been doing to provide technology for the industry in two flavors. For an industry that is already committed to a pretreatment where they need enzymes, we're going to provide you with better enzymes. For an industry that's starting and is open to a new pretreatment, we're going to provide you with a pretreatment that doesn't need enzymes. So first I'm going to talk about what we've been doing to identify, I think, really new and exciting enzymes. Enzymes that I only dreamed about when we were funded 7 years ago. So the enzymes that we knew about when we were funded 7 years ago were either really good at working on the blue polymer or the yellow polymer. So they were either cellulases that degraded the 6 carbon sugars, or mannases or xylonases that degraded the 5 carbon sugar polymers. What we've been able to do is identify a single polypeptide chain that eats both of those polymers. So now we have an industry that can, with one polypeptide chain, degrade all the polymers instead of having so much cellulase, so much mannase, and so much xylanase. So let me show you how we did that. So we did that, Adrian will love this story, because we went to the insects. We went to insects that degrade cellulosic biomass very, very efficiently. We've mined genomes from leafcutter ants. We've mined genomes from termites. It's not an insect, but we've mined cow ruminants. The best mining activity we have done so far comes from an insect known as Syrinx, which is a wood-boring wasp that defoliates forests in the upper northwest of the United States. And if you look at the microbes that are associated with that insect, you find many, many insect-associated microbes that have cellulolytic activity, and most of them are streptomyces. So if you look at the number of lines on this tree, each line represents a gene or an open reading frame you would like to analyze. It becomes mind-boggling if you're a graduate student in the center saying, Tim really wants me to clone and overproduce every one of those enzymes and test it for activity. And it does, because there are thousands. So what we've developed is a collaboration with the Joint Genome Institutes, where they have high throughput DNA synthesis. That graduate student can order 500 genes. They show up a month later, already cloned in a plasmid for free. A traditional approach would be you would then have to put that plasmid into an organism, hope it expresses, give you a stable enzyme, hope it folds and it's active. We bypass that because we use our little friend, this robot here, and we take those plasmids and we transcribe and translate those genes in a cell-free system, in a test tube, like in a wheat germ extract. Here's a polypeptide chain with probably 40 open reading frames, and you'll see a unique polypeptide in most of those links. We then take those polypeptides and we assay them for enzyme activity. This is in an old-fashioned system that allows you to identify if there's a dark color, it means it has enzyme activity. Here's an enzyme from a class that degrades a mannan polymer. So this is a mannanase. Here's a bunch of enzymes that degrade cellulase polymers. So these are known cellulases. Here's an enzyme that degrades a xylan polymer. So this is a xylanase. But when you first start doing this with enzymes that come from this insect, from this Streptomyces that's associated with this insect, uniquely now, we have open reading frames that give us a color in every lane. So these are enzymes that have activity with all of those different sugar polymers, we think. This is not a very quantitative assay, and we'd like to know how well they really are, how well they really work. Again, we have hundreds of these now. So now we have another high throughput mass spec-based assay that allows us to get KMs and KCATs for all of these enzymes at once. And we do that over here, and we can now see that the same polypeptide chain degrades cellulose and degrades hemicellulose and gives us products as a function of time. So this is a time-resolved assay, whereas that other old colorimetric assay was a single time point. So we can identify rates, we can get KMs, we can get all the things that enzymologists like to get, and convince ourselves that these open reading frames really are robust enzymes that in a test tube will degrade all the plant polysaccharides we feed. And because we have a structural biology core group, we actually have three-dimensional structures of many members of this family now, and we can see that their active sites have differences between those enzymes that only hydrolyze one polymer. So now we can see how to engineer and improve enzyme scaffolds to have better activities for us. Moving on, what if you're a company that doesn't want to even buy enzymes? Because enzymes are expensive, and it's another, if you're making biomass, unless you buy that company and own the enzymes, it's another company you have to buy something from. So we have some next generation pretreatments that actually bypass the need for enzymes to give us sugars and possibly even lignin. And here's one of them. It's the use of a compound known as gamma-valerolactone, this compound here. Quite frankly, we started this project because we wanted to make gamma-valerolactone from biomass because it was on the Department of Energy's top 100 valuable chemical list, and we decided if we could make it, we would enable the ability of using this either for polymerization into a hydrocarbon or for use in other chemical processes. But what we actually found is a clever postdoc in the center said, you know, people want this as a chemical because it's a really good solvent. What if I take some gamma-valerolactone and treat biomass with it? Can I, under milder conditions, actually get sugars and lignin that then other people in the center can process? And obviously the answer is yes, or I wouldn't be telling you that. So we now know that with the right amount of gamma-valerolactone under the right conditions, we can release sugar monomers, not polymers where you need enzymes, but sugar monomers and dimers that microbes will eat and convert into fuels without enzymes. It's renewable because if you put GVL in under the right conditions, you get the same amount of GVL out and you can recycle it. So it bypasses many of the expensive, rare chemicals that are currently used for biomass processing. And it's biomass agnostic. It works so far. It works with corn, it works with switchgrass, it works with every woody biomass that we've turned out. So that will really enable a refinery to say, now I have a process where I can convert any biomass that shows up at the gate into fuel because I have a solvent system that works on whatever I want to buy on the spot market today. And we are working with our partners in the technology transfer office to scale this. We're an academic center. We probably produce a liter of this per week, and we use it all to use for downstream experiments I'm going to tell you about in a moment, where we want to look at how microbes do fermenting this material into fuels. And industry wants millions of liters a year, and we need to figure out how to scale it. Well, we're working with people on campus that are separately funding the scale-up so that they can make it more attractive to industry. So the last little story I want to tell you about is really a story that's unique to something that we can do with the type of funding we've done in Great Lakes Bioenergy. If you were a plant biochemist or an agronomist, you could do all sorts of really creative experiments modifying crops. If you were a chemical engineer or an enzymologist, you could do all sorts of creative experiments, taking plant biomass apart and making juices or hydrolysates. If you were a microbiologist, you could do all sorts of creative experiments figuring out how to ferment materials. But in our center, we're lucky that we've been able to bring together almost 450 people that work in and across these boxes. So we can actually move materials from the field through processing to making fuels in an integrated way that we wouldn't be able to without the kind of funding that we have from DOE. So now let me tell you some of the lessons you can learn and how it sets us up for moving forward by having this ability to have all this expertise, collect all this data, put together systems to manage it to enable scientific discoveries. So for an example, what I'm going to do first is tell you about what happens when we make these hydrolysates. The way I've talked about this so far, you would think these hydrolysates are a lot of glucose, a lot of mannose, and a lot of xylose. Well, in fact, when you do most of these pretreatments, you get a lot of those sugars, but you get every other plant intermediary metabolite and amino acid that is degraded when you process that biomass. So first thing we needed to do is set up an analytical pipeline to tell what's in these hydrolysates. And this is what it is. A reason, I don't expect you to read it, this is published. There's over 120 compounds in there that we now routinely track and quantify. And not surprisingly, if you grow E. coli or yeast on this material, the genome tells you that they are not performing the same way that they would if you grew them on standard laboratory media. So this is the results of a global gene expression analysis. And if these, comparing a cornstarch hydrolysate to a standard laboratory media, if these two cultures were the same, all of these dots would be on a straight line going up. And you see outliers on the right and the left. So what you see, what this tells us is that these cells are under stress, they're energy limited, and those two things alone are inhibiting their fermentation ability. The good news of having all this data is we can now go to the shelf and make synthetic hydrolysate using chemicals that we buy and leave one or two compounds in and find out which compounds cause them to have which problem. And most of what we found is causing problems in these hydrolysates are things that we call lignitoxins. These are actually aromatics that get into the sugar stream from the lignin. A little bit of the lignin falls apart. And using something called chemical genomics, we've been able to show that over 24 lignitoxins block a small number of common sets in energy and nucleotide synthesis in to biofuel bacteria, E. coli and Xymomonas, as well as in yeast. So the way we do this is we have barcoded mutants in every open reading frame in each of these organisms, and we test individual lignotoxins against them, and we figure out which genes are responsible for the toxicity of the toxins. And what comes out of that is an amazing unity of biology to me. There are one specific enzyme that is the site for many of these lignotoxins working. And that now provides us with a target to go and improve that enzyme so it's now resistant to these lignotoxins. The other thing that comes out of that is there are minor lignotoxins, and here's one of them, proacic acid, that we were able to show only works on yeast and doesn't work on bacteria. And the chemical genomics told us that it works on a specific step in yeast cell wall biosynthesis, beta-1,4-glucan biosynthesis, and the literature told us that that is a prime target for the pharmaceutical industry as an antifungal, both in agriculture and in humans and animals. So we have now shown that proacic acid has this antifungal activity. This is its LD50. And we can show that it actually is a potent natural antifungal preventing soybean from this soybean pest. And again, we are now working with private sources and hopefully soon industry to develop this into a co-product from biomass processing that will make major impact on possibly plant, fungal toxins, as well as animals and others. So here is a valuable co-product for pharma that can come out of biomass processing. Just quickly, I've talked about ethanol. We're also making other compounds. In the center is fuel, things like isobutanol and hydrocarbons. And when we make those, here's a slide I put in for Adrian yesterday of one of the bacteria that we're making that excretes all this lipid into the media. When we make these compounds, again, we work with people in the engine center to test their combustion in fuels. One of the advantages of having a quality, world-class group like that right across the street from where we are. With a little bit of money, we can get a lot of data out of that. The last two things I'll go through quickly. I've talked about aromatics or lignin as being something that was a problem. But if you think about the economics of this, lignin is, depending on the plant, 1/4 to 1/3 of the carbon in biomass. So again, we can enable a new economic formula for biorefineries if we can convert the lignin in lignocellulose into valuable co-products. We did not think about this when we started. When we started, one of the favorite sayings in the field is, you can make a lot of things out of lignin except money, because people had tried for decades and not been able to. Well, now we have next generation pretreatments that give us soluble lignin fractions. And using microbial and chemical systems, we think we're able to make valuable co-products out of lignin. Here's an example. We can take a lignin polymer that we analyze by 2D NMR, and by chemistry, we can convert it into monomers and dimers. And by feeding these to bacteria that naturally eat aromatics, and mutant bacteria, we can secrete things like para-hydroxybenzoic acid and other valuable aromatics for the chemical industry. Remember, the chemical industry works on, it's called BTX, benzene, xylene, toluene. We think we can make those types of compounds for the chemical industry out of lignin. The last point I want to illustrate is that by having this system in place, we're now in the position to look at things that are absolutely relevant to a farmer and to an industry. And that is, how much do yearly and regional variations in the feedstock chemistry impact our ability to convert it into hydrolysates and make fuels from it? So as an example, this year we started a project where we began to look at feedstock variability across 3 separate years in 2 different crops, corn stover and switchgrass. We chose these years because they have similar lengths of their growing season. but they have different amounts of precipitation per month relative to the average. This shows the average per month in 10 and 13, and these were good wet years. In 12, it was a dry year. So as climate change occurs, we might have more dry years. Well, it turns out if we now process these materials and run them through that system, we see that the bacteria that we use are generally agnostic to whether the crop has come from a good year or a dry year. But the yeast that we and others in the field have evolved seem to care based on whether the crops come from a dry year or a good or an average year. And we actually now know what the chemicals are that are accumulated in those dry year corn stover samples that are having a negative effect on yeast fermentations. That allows us to go in and reverse engineer yeast to make strains that bypass yearly variation in water and other types of chemistries. So this is my last slide. You don't need to put up the sign, I hope. Hopefully I've tried to illustrate that we've come closer. We're not there yet in being able to produce these types of compounds from plant biomass, but I think I'm really proud of what we've done in the center to remove barriers and meeting new challenges as they come along with this team approach to develop sustainable biofuel crops, fuels, and chemicals that will allow agronomic systems and society to produce both fuel and food on the land without destroying the ecosystems and the sustainability of that land, and hopefully increasing the carbon benefits and mitigating climate change. And also, I think we've been very successful, more successful than I ever dreamed, in speeding our advances from the research lab to industry and developing technology that they want to take out and commercialize. So with that, I'm going to end. I'm going to put this beautiful picture of the Energy Institute building up. My name and email is here, as well as Mike's, if you want to get a hold of us. If you're interested in individual technologies, Jennifer is the person who's on point for all of our licensing efforts. So thank you all for your attention, and if I have time, I'll take some questions. If not, we can do it later this afternoon.
Time for questions.
And maybe I need to put my magic thing back in so I can understand it. In the back.
Thank you for your presentation. Usually, the first task when people talk about biofuels is the land that you will need and to, food, again, biofuels, whatever. And you talk very briefly the idea to use no usable land. But okay, and also increase the production of lipids, of quality of the crops or what you do. With this experiment, when you put this new gene or whatever, how much or how many square meters of land you can reduce, modifying these species, or how less land you will need to use in order to obtain economical or good result or something like that?
I would say I don't know the answer to that. I can't give you a real number for an answer to that question yet, because we're not there yet. But I would say I really don't have an answer to that yet. But I will say that when we started, we did not think that marginal lands would provide us as much fuel as we think it can provide now. I will also say that the respectful use of land is something that we worry about a lot. I would like to think that in a state like Michigan, farmers might reduce the amount of land for corn. They might be incentives to do that because none of my colleagues from Michigan are here, but Michigan land is not as fertile as Wisconsin land. And that's what my Michigan farmers tell me, right? Because of that, they need to add a lot more fertilizer. Fertilizer costs money. So if a farmer can make as much money by reducing how much corn he grows and growing perennials, he will probably do that. In Wisconsin, where the land is more fertile, maybe 10% of the land might be converted to perennials because there's some less fertile land in Wisconsin and some more fertile land in Wisconsin. If you go to a state like Iowa and Illinois, where the whole state is fertile, probably they will not do any of this. They will continue to grow corn the way they've grown corn, as long as there is a market for their corn. The market for corn in the United States falls into 3 sectors: animal feed, human consumption, and fuels. The biggest is animal feed. Even if we take cornstarch off the table for fuels, there will still be a huge need for corn in the US for animal feed, unless we all become vegetarians. Thank you. Anything else? Yes, sir.
Sí, buenos días. ¿Cómo está organizado el Instituto de Energía de Wisconsin en cuanto a la relación con la industria? Que usted menciona que la mayoría de proyectos la idea es llevarlos a fase de aplicación industrial. Entonces, ¿cómo financian y organizan los proyectos de investigación? ¿Quién pone los recursos? Y si es usual que hagan contratos con las empresas que eventualmente patrocinan esa parte, si nos pudiera contar un poquito.
I'll try a little. That's an excellent question. Thank you. That's an excellent question. Thank you. Mike might touch on it a little, but I'll try it as well. I would say we have 2 major types of industry interactions. I described one of those 2. We bring in federal and state money, and we generate knowledge that becomes invention disclosures that get licensed through the Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation. Then that money comes back to the campus. We also have the second interaction is something that we call sponsored research, where a company may say, I like what Tim's lab is doing, but it's really not tuned appropriately to fit into the exact yeast or plant system that we're working in. Will you help me do that? And I will say yes, but not with taxpayer money. If you give me money from a company, then I can do a specific manipulation to improve a process to make it compatible with your industry. And we negotiate all the terms of that first. Right now, the Energy Institute, 90% or more of it is in the first class. A small fraction is in the second class. But with 134 patents, I think the second class will go up. I know about conversations we're having right now. I would love it to be 50-50 and have sponsored research be $25 million a year, just like it is for Great Lakes Bioenergy. But it might take a little while to get there. Mike might have more to say about that later. Anything else?
Hi, and thanks for the presentation. I'd like to split my question in 2 parts. A, do genetically modified perennials survive just as good as natural perennials in the field? And B, you said there are some concerns about putting this in the field, so if you can mention a couple maybe.
So the short answer to your first question is we don't know, because we haven't produced enough out of work that we're doing. There may be others in the audience who know about survival of GMO perennials that I'm not aware of. But from our work, we have not put any GMO perennial traits in the field yet. Okay? The second question is, what is the general thinking about the use of GMOs for this technology overall? I think in the United States, there is an open mind right now to certain GMOs. We have GMO corn with botulinum toxin inserted in it to prevent insect disease. I could see a major plant company coming to us and saying, will you put ziplignin as a trait onto our BT traits? Or will you give us the traits so we can license this and do it? And I could see in the United States there would be acceptance for that. In the EU, I don't even think there's acceptance for BT corn, so I think the conversation would be very different. I think some of the receptivity, even for perennials, would be because this is not food-grade crop. But I would still have a scientific concern that we need to evaluate the stability of these traits in experimental plots if we're going to move GMO traits into perennials before we start to enable large-scale use of GMO perennials. That's a large reason why we've taken a native breeding approach to the switchgrass problem. I don't think we're there yet, but we're worried about it. Anything else?
Muchas gracias al doctor Donohue por su charla.
Seguidamente escucharemos la conferencia denominada Wisconsin Energy Institute, Innovations for Clean Energy Future, que será impartida por el doctor Michael Corradini, quien es el director del Instituto de Energía y del Instituto de Sistemas Nucleares de Wisconsin. El doctor Corradini, director de estos institutos, es ingeniero y mecánico nuclear. Sus intereses de investigación se centran en hidráulica térmica y flujo multifásico. Ha publicado más de 115 artículos en revistas indexadas y ha recibido 7 premios. Entre ellos se destaca el premio presidencial de la National Science Foundation a investigadores jóvenes y el premio del canciller de la Universidad de Wisconsin por excelencia en la enseñanza. Es miembro electo a la Academia Nacional de Ingeniería de los Estados Unidos desde 1998. Además, ha ocupado 11 cargos de dirección y presidencia, fue elegido vicepresidente y presidente de la Sociedad Americana Nuclear. Actualmente es presidente del Comité Científico Asesor para la Agencia Civil de Energía Atómica Francesa y es miembro de la Sociedad Americana de Ingenieros Mecánicos, del Instituto Americano de Ingenieros Químicos y de la Sociedad Americana Nuclear. Agradeciendo al doctor Corradini por su presencia, pedimos por favor que pase al frente para su charla.
You all hear me, right? Yeah. Do I need this? Is it required? It's required. So I wanted to thank everybody for inviting us, in particular Dr. Pinto and all his hospitality. We were taken around various places over the weekend, and it was all very wonderful. So thank you very much, and I'm very happy to be here with all of you. So I'm not used to having a microphone, so I'm not sure what I'm going to do with it. I may end up doing this. So what I wanted to talk about today with the energy students is a little bit different. So first, I've been to Costa Rica a number of times, but not as a, not professionally, but for fun. So I've come over the last 10 years a good 24 times to Tamarindo and Guanacaste. And so it's a wonderful country, wonderful. My wife wants to move here. So I'm in real trouble. So what I wanted to talk about today, though, was 4 different things. So I don't really have an outline, so to speak, but I want to tell you about it. but I also want to give proper credit. So our names show here, but in at least my case, my background is a mechanical engineer and a nuclear engineer, and I'm going to I tried to pick particular topics that might be interesting here for a number of reasons. One is for collaboration. As Dr. Donohue, as Tim said when he first started off, one of our major purposes in coming down was to understand what you're doing, what areas of energy you're interested in. Are there potential areas of collaboration with colleagues in Wisconsin that then we can go back and connect? So that's the first point. The second point is that a lot of this work is quite diverse. Tim is an expert in microbiology, bacteriology, and he went in the bio world. And I'm not going to go there. You're not going to hear a lot of bio in my part. But it's going to be, try to pick 4 topics that would be of interest to you to kind of show the breadth of the Energy Institute in other areas. But also, I tried to pick them in a context relative to what I think is going on in Costa Rica and what might be interesting technologically with Costa Rica. Okay? So that's kind of the context. But I'll give you more context. So the first thing is tackling climate change. I wasn't sure how to start the talk, so I thought it would be interesting to start it off because we're on the web these days, right? Nothing is ours. It's always out there to be captured. And I found this slide and I really liked it because what I liked about it was if I worry about energy and I worry about it in the context of climate change, it's not always about resources, it's not always about new technology. It could be a whole number of different ways of attacking things. And so I like this because it talks about the demand side, that is, things I can do which could reduce CO2 emissions that has nothing to do with new technology. It may have to be with better efficiency, more conservation, various clever ways to use energy systems, and I tried to find an example there in a systems analysis approach. It could be the supply side. We want to produce energy from carbon neutral energy sources, which I'll try to talk about with an example. Okay? It also may have to do with adaptation. I'm not an expert in adaptation, I'm an engineer. In fact, I should have asked that. The biologists, raise your hand. I know you. The chemists. Okay. The physicists. I didn't see many physicists. Ah, good. Engineers. Oh, good. All right. So I'm not very good at adaptation, but I wanted to point out at least how we start this off, at least in my mind. It's not always new technology, new conversion, new sources, right? It's a combination of these things to attack the problem. So let me continue with my context. I guess I can do this. So let's talk about electricity. Unfortunately, I only know the United States, but I have one Costa Rican slide that's a little bit out of date. But if I look in the U.S. electricity market, what you find is that the outlook is pretty stagnant, right? These are from the Energy Information Agency, essentially the DOE's factual group. So in theory, it's correct, in theory. But what I wanted to point out is here we are at 2012, and we see growth estimated in the future of about 1% per year. But the growth is primarily in natural gas. To a small extent, renewables, nuclear, and coal are expected to stay fairly constant, right? All the growth is in natural gas. Good, not great in terms of climate change. Renewables, quite good. What they don't say, but I want to point out, is where I have emission-free generation. And so I picked this also from the EIA, but I made it a little bit prettier, all right? In terms of that, if I'm looking for emission-free electricity, it's all a matter of what is the source. And then I'm going to, how many of you own homes? Good. So my wife is a real estate agent, but I don't have her card with me. But it's all about location, location, location. So when I talk about the United States, it's interesting, but it's not your location, okay? So this is very peculiar to the United States. If I went to France, it would almost be 90% nuclear and 10%, okay? So it's all about location. But at least in the US, this is how we get emission-free generation. And the wheel changes in terms it grows, and the various colors change, but this is the only way we can do it. If I look at energy output, it's also interesting that people forget, because of the recession, we're actually back to where we were in early 2000. If you look at the little blip here, here's 2000 or somewhere right after that, after the first recession. We forgot about that recession. It was a little tiny one as we brought in a Republican. But, sorry. erase that from the tape. But anyway, we had a small one, and then in 2008 we had our large recession. We're back over here now at about the same amount of energy use as we were back 15 years ago. So because of just change in the economics and what we respond to economically, right, changes how we use energy. But again, the picture in the United States is fairly flat, except for growth in natural gas to a little bit extent and growth in renewables. Everything is relatively flat. So now back to demand versus supply. The reason I showed you these things for the United States is how at least things may essentially affect the U.S. in the future for CO2 reductions does not have a lot to do with supply. It has a lot to do with demand. So it depends on what you define it. But if you look here, if we install where the expected energy efficiency standards for new cars, light-duty trucks, heavy-duty trucks, we're going to save mileage, right? So we use the resource more efficiently. We essentially reduce carbon emissions. We essentially improve energy production efficiency of our devices. I looked at the various types of appliances, etc. We save carbon, we have carbon reduction. We change in lighting. We go from incandescent to fluorescent to light-emitted diodes. And then again, that shoots at about 25% energy change. Again, we affect carbon emissions. Finally, if we get to production and supply, we look at nuclear renewables are here, and that's the supply effect. So one of the things that's very interesting going for the next few decades, at least in the US, is the way we're going to get there is not going to be by different supply necessarily, it'll be mainly by demand. So my last slide on my context is Costa Rica. So this is out of date. I couldn't find a pretty picture of electricity production in Costa Rica, but I did check with various experts, at least for the last 2 days, and I think it's approximately right in 2014 numbers or 15 numbers. Approximately 3/4 of electricity is produced by hydro. I think it's a little bit less than 70 in those days, much more in geothermal, but the slice of the pie is like this. So at least from Costa Rica's standpoint, in terms of location, you're much more carbon neutral. In fact, we were told in one of our tours, you're number 3 coming out of the Paris Accords, number 3 out of the top 10 in terms of the most carbon neutral and sustainable governments and countries. So you're way further along than we'll ever be, at least in the next few decades. So that's the context. I want to talk about a little bit about demand, and I have some examples, and I'm going to move to supply a little bit and take you through some examples. Let me tell you a bit about our Energy Institute. It's about 10 years old. We started it about 10 years ago by a group of us, faculty. Again, the other thing, and I'm a faculty member, I've been doing this for 35 years, and I all know that faculty obey. No. Right? So this was something that was started in Wisconsin by a group of us thinking that it was very important to try to look at and connect energy issues. So we essentially started as a group of about 10 or 12 of us, 13 of us, getting together, having meetings, having seminars, and then the Energy Institute was born out of that. It now sits by connection to around campus to about 100 different faculty and scientists. And we really are a nationally recognized institute where we're looking at discovering and deploying innovative energy technologies. That's code for research. Public forums to learn about and discuss energy issues. That's code for education, whether it's educating students or it's educating the outside general public or interested parties and groups. And very importantly, Tim used this as an example, and I think there was a question about it, to engage industry in high-impact research collaborations, right? At least in the US, we are driven, however successfully, to connect with industry because unless it goes out into the marketplace and something comes of it by a new business, a new process or product, it really doesn't go anywhere. He already mentioned it, I'll simply emphasize that we have 2 general themes. One theme is fuels and chemicals, and he took care of that expertly, I must say, right? And the other theme is electricity systems. If you look at those themes, it really comes into 4 areas of feedstocks, fuels, transportation, energy storage, which I have an example of both types, carbon neutral electricity sources, I'll mention, but I thought I'd leave that since you're so carbon neutral, I'm very jealous. And then policy, economics, and societal impact. I chose not to try to touch that one because I'm sure that would generate a lot of discussion. We can leave that to the discussion period at the end. So a little bit facts about us. We have about 150 different projects around campus. Most of it is the federal government. That kind of goes back with the question. The Department of Energy, the Department of Defense, the National Science Foundation. We have a good bit of industrial support from automotive companies, from suppliers, original equipment suppliers of various technologies, utilities, power companies. Because we're an institute and it's at a university, and Wisconsin is slightly democratic about this, we only invite facilitation with other faculty. They don't belong to the institute. We kind of adopt them, they kind of adopt us. So we interact with about 100 different faculty and scientists. It's spread out over 5 colleges and a good number of graduate students, about 500 graduate students, mainly doctoral students, but a good of Masters of Science students also. Now, if I was in front of the provost or the chancellor or the vice chancellor of research, I would have to tell you money. I can't help myself, I apologize, but it's relatively substantial. We're depending on how you count in energy at Wisconsin, it's something about $125 million a year, right? Tim already talked about the GLBRC, which is the large center on campus. We have jokes about it between Tim and I about what we call that, but it's big, it's really big. Right, about $25 million a year and going through approximately 10 years, plus additional infrastructure inputs. Fusion, I'm a nuclear engineer, so I could talk about all this sort of fun stuff, is relatively large on campus between engineering and physics, which is of this order. Fission, which is a good fraction of our energy mix in the United States and in the future of that order in engineering. Tim mentioned this, but I wanted to get to it. Internal combustion engine and transportation. If you take the work that's being done in mechanical engineering, in electrical engineering, in civil engineering in terms of transportation systems. We toured one of the facilities that way, looking at road infrastructure and the work that's being done relative to inspection and QA. If you take all that together, a very large effort is on at Wisconsin, and then renewables of the same order. So it's fairly diverse. It's a fairly diverse portfolio. So, example number 1, and I noticed that I started 15 minutes late, so I'm not sure what the timer is going to get up and when I'm going to see the little button, so I'm going to try to go through. My first example is not really technology, but it's systems analysis. Now, I said this at the beginning, but I'll emphasize it. Most of this, all of this is not my research. So I borrowed, stole, cajoled, that's an English word for influence them to give me slides that I could use. One is from Dr. Meyer, Paul Meyer, and he's really a systems analyst. He developed a technique where you essentially look, and it's being used in the GLBRC as well as being used in electricity systems, where he looked at electricity systems, transportation systems, fuel production systems, and he modeled the system, right, the complete system. And then he posed it as a problem and says, now what if I have a policy change? I invent a carbon tax, I require some sort of reduction in CO2 emissions. How does that drive the cost? How does it drive emissions? How does it drive in the electricity sector? You have to have margin. In the United States, you have to have something like 20% overcapacity just in case something bad happens and one of your electrical generators go off. So you have to have margin. So he did this as a simulation. So one of the things that I think would be interesting to you all for collaboration is working with this part of the Energy Institute where you can do a simulation. It's called Juicebox. Why it's called Juicebox, I have no idea. Okay? But it's a simulation approach for energy modeling. And what I mean by a simulation approach, and I'm only going to pick one example here on one slide, but it simulates the national energy production, particularly it models electricity. Dr. Meyer has gone through all the United States, has essentially put in the database all electrical energy generation in every state of all types, and then allows you to play a simulation game and says, now, if I change the policy and I demand, as just now the EPA has demanded, a 30% reduction in CO2 emissions as of from 2005 through 2030, essentially a 25-year plan, right? How do I do that? And you can essentially say, well, if I build renewables, this will cost me so much, this will change the emissions, this will change the reserve capacity, this will change the effects of voltage and frequency for the electrical engineers, right, in the audience, on how I produce it. And so how does that simulate out? So this is very interesting for systems analysis. for what you're doing here, or what I understand to be the electricity systems in this country, this might prove interesting to you. But a systems analysis approach, engineers always love to first get a pencil and a piece of paper and start saying the what ifs and how it all fits together. And so this evaluates technologies and potential policy alternatives. So that's one example, a very short example. Oh, and then of course, we have to have people working together, and that's our people working together part of the slide. Let me give you another example that was by Dr. Reindl. Doug Reindl runs an industrial consortium looking at essentially thermal energy storage as an example of how one can take current energy sources and very cleverly use them in a way to save money and hopefully reduce CO2 emissions. In the northern Midwest, where I'm from in Wisconsin, what you find is that commercial building demand, so not houses, but large buildings such as this, a building on campus, at least, and I think in this environment is true, in Wisconsin, particularly in the summertime, you get large swings in temperature. You get large swings in temperature in the winter too, but we're not talking about air conditioning. And the largest electrical load is cooling by heating and ventilation and air conditioning, right? The largest load. If you go through a particular couple of days, it swings like this. Now, you may say, so what? If you're a utility person that has to turn on all those electrical generators and turn them off, this is a big demand that you have to deal with. And you want to know what it is and how you can predict it so you can properly do it, okay? So this is in Wisconsin. So driven by midday and early evening, the air conditioning demand is enormous. It essentially drives the system for electricity production. If I go to another part of the country in New England, this is from the ISO stands for Independent System Operator of New England. The hourly demand and the price per week, this is 2006, but it hasn't really changed. It looks very similar. Goes up, goes down, goes up, goes down, and these are large swings, right? We're going from essentially 12,000 megawatts all the way up to double, okay? That's a very big swing. Then I've got to turn on generators, turn off generators. I've got to balance the load. Otherwise, when you dry your hair, the motor will start going on fire because of the change in frequency and voltage, right? So you have to adjust to this. So how does one do it? Well, the way the utilities do it is they charge you for it, okay? Now, I was converting. So at daytime, it's 14 cents or $0.14 per kilowatt hour. That's 75 colones-ish. I'm not sure what it is really here, but that's what the equivalent is. Nighttime is here. So they try to drive you to use your electricity in the low peak areas to essentially balance the load, right? Well, one technological way to do this is through energy storage. And so I wanted to pick thermal energy storage as an example here because there's various types of energy storage. I'll actually show you another one in a minute. But you want to decouple the demand from the supply. So it's a demand-side approach, but requires capital investment. Allows for production of the storage when resources are available, when costs are low. Potential for downsizing equipment. Most of this is, I invest in a storage equipment, I essentially can pull back on capital equipment, particularly for large buildings. So I'm really thinking, at least in the Costa Rican possible application, is not individual homes, but large commercial industrial buildings where you have large AC loads. It enhances reliability and redundancy. So, a building's cooling system is a significant energy user, particularly in hot, humid climates. By the way, the Central Valley is beautiful. We were where were we? We were on the West Coast, and it was a little bit hot. And in the rainforest, a little bit humid. But it dominates electrical loads compared to other storage technologies. Thermal energy storage is really the most cost-effective way to do this. Potential, right? And then the other thing too is, and this is very engineering, but I'm sorry, I'm an engineer. When you do these designs, most engineers are told that you design something to run at some steady state. It's got to run, and it's better if it doesn't do this all the time, but it runs very consistently and effectively. The more you can make most of this equipment run at a consistent load, the longer it'll last. Operation and maintenance costs are down, reliability goes up. So, here's a typical space conditioning problem. I've got a refrigeration connected to a building. Refrigerant must operate when the load exists. Refrigeration capacity is modulated response. If I need more, I gotta have a big enough piece of equipment to basically suck out all the hot air and the humidity out of the system and then reject it to the atmosphere. Otherwise, people get upset in the building and they look for the engineer or somebody to get upset with. All right? So what you're really interested in is developing a system where you develop some sort of storage technology where you can charge and discharge the system. You basically keep the load constant such that when you don't need the air conditioning load, you're essentially cooling the storage medium, and when you need the additional air conditioning load, instead of using it off of the air conditioning device itself, a refrigeration system, right, a typical air conditioner, you essentially would take it from the cooling source and essentially then use that as an auxiliary source of cooling. I'm trying to make this simple for the biologists. I saved that one for you all. So, one way is just strictly sensible heat. I get a big tank of water, I cool it down. When essentially I do this on an off-peak time late at night when the electricity costs are low, right? And I cool that, and I wait, and when I come to a large increase in demand, I essentially can suck away from that. Pretty straightforward. I gave you all sorts of numbers. Engineers love numbers, all right? And in the units that nobody likes, okay, BTUs, I'm sorry, but they're in C2. The one that is being used now, particularly, and again, I mentioned Dr. Reindl, who gave me a lot of these slides and educated me a bit, at least in the northern Midwest, is what is called the stratified chilled water storage. Because water is at different densities, at different temperatures, you can essentially put a bladder, some sort of partition, and you can essentially run this such that I can charge the system with cold water, right? And then when I need to, I can discharge it and essentially use this bladder as essentially a cold source. And by this separating the hot and the cold by density and essentially a barrier, I essentially get even more efficient use of the thermal energy storage. The final one, which is used in large systems, the example I have here is from a large apartment complex in New York City, is essentially you instead of sensible heat, you use latent heat. And you essentially make ice, and you melt ice. Again, this doesn't sound very technologically thrilling, okay? But we were at a hotel, and I've forgotten the name of it, down in near Manuel Antonio, and the owner of the hotel came out to talk to us about his sustainable usage, and what was very impressive to me is he's decided to go with solar, and the only thing that made cost-efficient sense to him was solar heating of the hot water, right? And how he essentially arranged in the building, to me, I found it as an engineer fascinating, because he said, not only am I saving money, but I can afford putting it in, right? So it's very interesting. In a very similar fashion here, ice thermal storage systems, you essentially do a latent heat conversion, and you're even more efficient, and the storage system, if you can, from a capital cost standpoint, is reduced. Okay, so that's my second example. Key benefits are you can reduce electricity costs, you use smaller cooling equipment, which means your incoming capital costs are lower. All right, I'll let you read this. The other important thing is redundancy. By doing this, you have essentially a diverse, redundant system that if something goes down, you have a backup system as part of the situation. And then in the long term, you can decrease energy use. Back to my whole idea that I've got a more efficient system if I run it at steady state for long periods of time. Okay, so that's my second example. Again, when I talked to Dr. Reindl, he had heard, and I'm going to say this and somebody will correct me if I'm wrong, that at least in Costa Rica and Central America, there's now a growing amount of data centers, like computer centers that store data, which require cooling, which require what I'll call dedicated high reliability cooling. And this is where a lot of this is being installed in the U.S. Third example. So now in the U.S. what's happening these days, and again I'm giving you examples here that we have faculty and scientists and students working on. I worked with Professor Tom Johns and his group in electrical engineering. And what's happening in the U.S. these days with more installations in various locales of renewables, particularly solar photovoltaics, particularly that, and in certain locales wind, right? In certain locations wind, what you find is that the electrical grid, the transmission grid, has to change, okay? So it's partly due to carbon neutral sources, whether they be distributed, as I just said, or I'll talk about centralized sources. Right? Partly due to that you might want to have redundancy of a backup source. Partly because of economics and policy. We're being pushed that way in the U.S. in various states. The states have what's called a renewable energy portfolio, which requires a percentage of the electricity being produced from renewables, and there's a target time and a target percentage. And also because of, we were talking about from a supply standpoint reducing greenhouse gases, but also because of extreme weather events. Recently in the U.S. we've had some hurricanes that have taken out the central grid, and only the distributed sources in that region survived. And so that made it very intriguing that this is a way to increase resiliency of the grid. So the challenge I wrote in one slide with various pretty pictures is what would our electricity delivery system look like if we could redesign to meet these new challenges and needs. So we want improved resiliency. The U.S. has a relatively stable and high reliability grid, but interestingly enough, we had some visitors from Germany, and the Germans, bless their hearts, immediately reminded us that theirs is better than ours. Very German. I'm sorry. I apologize. But it's true. Okay? So, increased system resiliency. Higher reliability, increased efficiency, reduce the carbon emissions, because if I could do this in a very clever way, I can have centralized carbon neutral sources as well as distributed carbon neutral sources, reduce peak load on transmission lines. Now that sounds unusual, but I have an example about that that's very Midwest, and reasonable electricity costs. So here is a typical, what it used to look like in the U.S., where I have a central station generation, I have transmission, and then I distribute to a lower voltage source. So this is, I generated high voltage, I move it at a certain voltage, anywhere from 500 down to 140 kV, and then I distribute it even lower voltages. An electrical engineer did these slides, so all the numbers are there, right? All the numbers are there. Well, what's the problem is that I lose a lot of the input energy by just thermodynamics, right? Unfortunately, the second law does exist, and we must obey it, right? And due to things that occur. So this is essentially a bunch of transmission towers that came down in Quebec with high winds. And then, of course, there is a thing called snow. You don't have it here, or very little of it. But at least in the Midwest, I have ice storms and snowstorms which will take down the distribution systems, and it could be for hours or days. Right? So losses in resiliency are challenges. So delivery system with a distributed energy resource would look something like this. Same sort of makeup. I might change the central station generator. I'll show you that in a cartoon. But what I want to now install, as I'm being driven to this, either by policy, because as I said, the renewable energy portfolio laws, or a change in price. At least in certain parts of the country, depending on the wind available and the sunshine available, right, it is really economically more advantageous to try to do a renewable energy local generation. And so I might have these distributed sources. So now I bypass potentially the transmission system, right? But I've got to fit it in. So how do I fit it in? Well, here's the conventional grid as I showed here in my cartoon. Here's a future grid. I stuck in a nuclear power plant. I'm a nuclear engineer. But I'll give you my example about this. It turns out in the North Midwest, we have something on the order of around 35 to 50% nuclear. And what is now being done is essentially to change the load of the nuclear plants to essentially accommodate when the wind blows and the sun shines. In the Midwest, it's primarily wind, it's not solar, right? But if I have an incoming prediction of a large wind and the wind farms will come up, what is now being done is to coordinate the increase in renewables because of wind generation and essentially bring down the central station plant to essentially meet the demand and actually reduce traffic on the grid. Because if I have a generator that's a base load, some plant, coal, natural gas, nuclear plant, it doesn't really matter, and I have only a certain amount of wires that can get to your home or to your business, and all of a sudden the wind starts blowing, and the policy says when the wind blows you must take that electricity by law, now you've got a little bit of a problem. So what is now being done is the utilities are essentially predicting ahead and essentially bringing down the central station unit as the wind is coming up in the next day. But In this case, my example is here, that now I'm going to be installing distributed energy resources close to the sites of use. Okay? And because I do that, right, I have to generate what is called a microgrid. Now, why am I telling you all this? Well, because Wisconsin kind of thought this up. Professor Lassiter, Professor Johns, Professor Lippo, and Professor Novotny in electrical engineering over the past couple of decades have been pushing the idea that microgrids are the way to get around and control the grid when I'm starting to put in distributed energy sources, right? And so this is an example of what could be in it. I have the loads, that's all of us, like this building. I produce things, right? I also take away things, and I can store them in batteries and fuel cells, in plug-in hybrids and flywheels. And I have to have some sort of power electronics fast switch that opens and closes and connects to the grid and disconnects very quickly and reliably. I have candidate microgrid sources, and I have an example. It turns out that Wisconsin, along with UC Berkeley, Purdue, Michigan, and I think Illinois, as a group of universities, work with the California Energy Commission and basically put up a microgrid in a jail, in the Santa Rita jail, to prove. In this case, the energy source is natural gas, right? As well as local photovoltaics. These are the photovoltaic cells on tops of the buildings. But I then have a local microgrid that when I generate excess power, I sell it back to the California grid system. And then I can disconnect if I want to and just run the system independently. Or if I have a cloudy day or I'm essentially low on natural gas pressure, I can connect up back to the grid and then get electricity from the grid. Okay? So this is the microgrid concept as an example, a very large example case. So on the left is my conventional system, and the right is my personal power plants. In Wisconsin, we actually allow for net metering. Do you know what that word means? Net metering? That means that if I have a home and I put up a photovoltaic cell, a wind turbine in a home is a little bit hard, but a photovoltaic cells, I can essentially send the electricity to the system and they will buy it back from me at some set price. And then when the sun goes down or I have a cloudy day or a few cloudy days in Wisconsin, I then buy from the system and they look over a month, over a couple of weeks, and they do a net cost. How much did I produce? How much did they produce? They do a calculation and I get a bill. Okay? But now I'm talking even more complicated, that I now just don't have homes, but I have businesses, commercial, etc. And now I essentially have a dynamic distribution system which now will connect and disconnect in a very reliable way such that I can go between centralized carbon neutral sources and distributed sources. I think I said all that. I have one more example and I'm over my time. So I don't want to... Okay, so this dynamic distributed system architecture. This was actually developed by the UW folks. It is not something that is patentable per se. It's a control system logic, but the electrical engineers made me promise I had to show you this slide. Okay, because this is kind of it in cartoon form, which is you basically have to develop a functional cluster. That is, you've got to decide ahead of time by systems analysis for this building, for this campus like the jail, or a hospital. There's a hospital just on the west side of Wisconsin on the Mississippi River. It's called Gundert and Lutheran Hospital, and they have a combination of natural gas and photovoltaics on site. You have to design ahead of time your system such that you have enough distributed sources on site, backup power, storage facilities, and then the appropriate distribution system to connect to the grid. And now you have a functional cluster. So an example of buildings and factories, large groups, right, or neighborhoods, but usually commercial facilities is what we've seen in the United States. You need sufficient, essentially distributed energy sources to essentially produce your power if you want to essentially go off the grid. And then this dynamic distribution architecture, that's code for electrical engineering power electronics switchgear, is essentially monitors the system, monitors the voltage and frequency, and then when you're producing enough power, you disconnect from the local grid, and then you reconnect if necessary. But all of this can only be done reliably if you have the appropriate technology for this connect and disconnect. Otherwise, something bad happens and the customers get mad at the utility. I'm sure there are people here from the electric utility, and I know those in Wisconsin. They do not like to get angry at it. So they need reliability. They need reliability. And then you need grid control. Okay? So observations of my third example. Today's grid is under, at least in the United States, is under increasing pressure to change due to demands from greenhouse gas emissions. At least in the US, there's a policy. As I said, you guys are way ahead of us in terms of carbon neutral sources. But at least in the US, driving it with policy, right? Distributed energy resources are certain to play an increasing role. And then this system, this architecture, this electrical engineering architecture where you have a combination of control systems, distributed generation with distributed storage, right, will work out quite well. And will probably lead to very significant changes in certain parts of the country. And again, I gave you my example about the utility just south of us in the Chicago area where they actually turn on and off their nuclear plants basically to collaborate with the wind machines in Iowa and Minnesota and the Dakotas. All because of just that locale, that location. Okay. Fourth example, then we'll stop for questions. So how do we currently generate electrical power? Well, so now I started with demand and systems analysis, and I'm now moving to supply. So in today's world, for a century at least, over 2/3 of the US electricity production uses what is called the Rankine cycle. I'm sorry, that's engineering jargon for fun stuff, okay? All right? But essentially, I boil water, I put it through a turbine, it turns the blades, I turn a generator, and out comes electricity. It works. It's worked for a century, okay? The problem is the efficiencies are limited, okay? They're limited. Something around 30 or 40% of electricity out over heat in. So the limits on temperature and pressure are there, but it's a highly optimized system. So what if we could get more? What if we could get 45 or 50% efficiency? So in the US in 2013, we generated about 4,100 billion kilowatt hours of electricity, right? Of that, a little bit over 2/3, 67% came from this type of power conversion system, this Rankine cycle. You don't need to know what it is if you don't care. Biologists, relax. There'll be no test. No test, right? But that correlates into about 100, I have to pick on the biologist. He picks on me all the time. That correlates to about $160 billion in expenditures. For every 5% improvement on that efficiency, I could save $8 billion a year because I use less fuel. I could potentially be more reliable. Okay, so what does this mean? Well, what we've embarked on with a group of industries, there was a question earlier about industries, and I'll show you at the very end of these slides, all our partners in this, is a federal government initiative with industry, and we're part of this industrial university team replying to the federal government. And the proposal is to change the working fluid, not from water, and we'll now switch to CO2. So just before I told you CO2 was a bad thing, inside of the system at pressure, it's a very good thing. Okay? It's a very good thing. And so supercritical CO2 is the fluid that we are looking at as the essentially working fluid for these advanced power conversion systems. And I purposely show you this here because it doesn't matter the heat source. The conversion system is essentially agnostic. It doesn't care what the heat source is. It could be a coal plant. It could be a natural gas plant. It could be a solar thermal. It could be a nuclear plant. It could be essentially natural gas locally generated, okay, or a diesel genset. Any of these as a heat source will work with this, as long as I can have the appropriate temperatures and pressures that would drive the cycle. So use of CO2, I figured you were going to do that. Use of CO2 above the critical point. You all know what I mean by a supercritical fluid? If not, I'm going to jump ahead of one picture. I know all the engineers love this, but I'm sure we want to teach the biologists something today. So here's temperature, here's specific volume, essentially the reciprocal of density. It turns out that water is two-phase, liquid and vapor underneath the blue line at certain temperatures and certain specific volumes. But CO2 is down here, okay? Which means if I'm a very clever engineer and I design my system, I run it above the green line and I don't have any phase change. You may say, well, you know, who cares about boiling? But I've been doing multi-phase flow for 40 years. Boiling is a tough little thing. So if you can get away from phase change and have energy transfer, it's a very good thing. And so I run the system at supercritical conditions. For CO2, that's essentially about 30 C and about 74 bars, or 7.4 MPa. All right? So low temperature, it's very cleverly, it acts like a liquid. You can pump it. It essentially pumps with very high density. At high temperatures, it acts like a gas. From a heat transfer and turbo machinery standpoint for turbines and heat exchangers, this makes the design much simpler. Okay, and I'll show you how simple. Currently, it's used extensively. I'll give you some examples, right? And if we can get through the demonstration phase, this should essentially displace a good bit of essentially using steam as part of the power cycle. So I already showed you this. I only want to say that if I have a Rankine cycle, I tend to run the steam turbine over here at these specific volumes and these temperatures, right? And their temperatures are in C for the good people and in Fahrenheit for the crazy Americans. If I run the CO2 system, the turbine can run at similar high temperatures but much higher temperatures, which gives me even more efficiency, right, by the second law of efficiency. Oh, and then one other thing. I told you this, that if I run above the green line for CO2, it runs like a pump, right? It behaves, even though it's a gas, you can pump it as if it was a liquid. And you don't have any issues relative to the pumping process. So this is a low-cost process in comparison to a high power output process above. So this is a busy slide, and I wasn't sure how much time I had, so my thought was I'd show it to you. If I was late, I would just show it to you, but I have a minute. So up here is essentially a diagram of a systems analysis. A number of the engineers at our institution, at MIT and at San Diego National Labs, have done analyses that if I design the system, what's the change point by which the Rankine cycle becomes less advantageous? And it's something around 450 degrees C. If I can get the heat input around 450 degrees C, then it essentially, I will get a net benefit, right, at least from a thermodynamic standpoint. So that's point one. Point two is, it has very high power density. Here is a picture of a gentleman here, he's kind of hard to see, standing next to a steam turbine for 10 megawatts. That steam turbine, if we put it here, is like this big, okay? If I do the same thing in 10 megawatts for a supercritical CO2, it's essentially, I can put it on this stand, all right? And it all has to do with the molecular weight and the flow rate of the gases flowing through the process, and then other things related to fluid mechanics, which we won't talk about, all right? But a very high power density machine, which means if I can shrink my turbo machinery, I shrink my capital costs, okay? So that's point one. The other thing too is that it's a relatively interesting how you can then make these materials out of composites, okay, out of composites, such that the actual turbine itself, if I didn't bring my composite turbine with me, but it's essentially this size here for a few megawatts of power. It runs at very high speed. It's what is called a radial turbine. It's not a typical impulse turbine or impulse turbine. Last thing, it's more complicated? The answer is no. This is a typical plant running at 40% efficiency and a supercritical plant under the same conditions. I will simply tell you without going through the fun temperature entropy diagram. Again, mechanical engineers are a strange breed, right? We talk about entropy. But if I, instead of going to the diagram, that basically this is a system with many flow backs and control systems, whereas this is one single power output with one recirculating loop. So, what are the advantages? Higher cycle efficiency, lower operational cost, right? At least in all the experiments that have been done on our site and at San Diego National Laboratories, decreased maintenance. The other interesting thing in the U.S. at least, and I'm not really sure here because you have water all around you, but at least in the U.S. and many parts of the country, water usage is becoming a very big issue. And so you can run this and design this system that you reject heat to the environment and the air instead of water, which is lower water usage, which is a big deal. Improve load following and hopefully lower maintenance costs. My final slide is here because this is not at Wisconsin. This is a big endeavor. It's a federal project. We're part of a number of teams. It's got a very strange name. It stands for STEP, Supercritical Transformational Electric Power. Very strange name. But essentially, we're putting together proposals to do a power cycle test facility at Wisconsin with these industrial groups as part of it. You might recognize Areva. That's the large power construction company of the French. They're they're the lead of the team. We're part of it. Southern Company and Madison Gas and Electric. Southern Company is in Atlanta region. And this shows you how the various project pieces are put together in all our partners. So with that, I gave you 4 examples. I hope that was good enough. I'll show you Wisconsin today and the Energy Institute today. It has beautiful snow all over it. And it's a little cold. Thank you. So there are questions?
Hi. Do you have plans to for your R&D with hydrogen?
No. I'll give you a thermodynamic reason. It's such a low molecular, but now are you talking with fuel cells?
Well, you mentioned fuel cells in one slide.
Right.
But in general, hydrogen for
that, so I'm going to give you a personal answer because I don't know, I have colleagues that believe in fuel cells. The problem is getting the hydrogen and the thermodynamics and essentially, I'll call it the energy payback of getting the hydrogen. To the extent that we can use, I have to point to him, I'm sorry, but to the extent that I can use some sort of biomass input and modest temperatures with appropriate catalysis, that would work. But if I can't do that, then the energy payback gets dicey. I put more energy in than I'm getting out. I just change it to a mobile fuel source. So hydrogen is not, in today's political climate of the US, it's not a very preferred fuel. But everything is driven by how I would make it. So I think that's how I would answer that question. A colleague of mine who's a thermodynamicist basically says that if we're going to do it with hydrogen, we might as well do it with natural gas. Because the current sources to do fuel cells is you do CH4, methane, you do a water gas shift reaction, and out pops CO2 and hydrogen, and then you use the hydrogen. Might as well just burn the natural gas in a reciprocating engine or something, and you get a better overall efficiency. But that's just me. Sorry, that was too much of an engineering answer. I apologize. Other questions? Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. I missed it.
Muchas gracias por la...
I'm ready.
Muchas gracias por la presentación. Me llamó la atención el uso de aire acondicionado muy alto el consumo de electricidad. ¿Qué tanto se utiliza la geotermia de baja entalpía para bombas de calor?
Okay, let me repeat the question. So the question was, he agrees, this young gentleman over here agrees with me about the use of air conditioning being a large power, energy demand. And the question was, what about geothermal as the source of the heat for a heat pump approach? So the answer to the question is that's, okay, so I have, again, we're back to location, location, location. In Wisconsin, what is done, whether I use a heat pump for heating or for cooling, is they have local geothermal wells on our large buildings. For our largest building, a very interesting building called the Wisconsin Institute of Discovery, they went down about 200 feet into the ground and used essentially the shallow temperatures of the earth for heat pumps, whether it be for heating or for cooling. So in Wisconsin, because we go through the hot and cold cycle in extremes, We use geothermal in both cases, but you have to pre-design the building to go deep enough, okay? So that's in Wisconsin. In California, that's done, what you're saying, to use geothermal wells as essentially your source as a heat pump. That's done commonly. But what is most prevalent in the US these days is if I build a new home or a new commercial building, I would look for essentially the most constant temperature source, which is to go down in shallow geothermal as your temperature source. Am I making sense? Okay?
Gracias.
Other questions? First, this gentleman and that gentleman.
Just, it's not part of your presentation, this is not part of your presentation, but maybe you can tell something, maybe, could you tell?
If I can't, Tim can.
Yes, no problem, yes. No, it's in regards to the use of born waste materials to obtain methane and, energy.
Oh, okay.
With this garbage, something like that. And can it be considered a clean energy, not clean energy? Just because you put other eolic, solar, other things. Of
Sure.
So that's my concern.
So I think, so I'll tell you where I first saw garbage as a heat source. And that was when I was in graduate school in Boston. There's a town called Saugus, Massachusetts. And they've been incinerating their garbage for a long time. The difficulty there is not that you couldn't use it, but it's a low energy source. So I'm sorry, I was about to say BTUs. I apologize. But it's a low energy source per unit mass. And the second thing is it has the free release emissions are relatively large. So you have to clean that gas before you release it to the environment. So if you follow the current EPA limits in the US, it's doable, but you have to scrub the effluent quite carefully because of all the things you just said, right? So I'm not sure what I would call it as renewable or not renewable, but it's recyclable material. But it requires a lot of separation, a lot of manual labor still to separate out things that you don't want in it. And then eventually, once you do it, because of the heavy metals and stuff that you then mobilize, you have to remove it from that. So it's doable, but it only works in certain metropolitan areas where you want to invest in that compared to something else. And I only picked Saugus, Massachusetts because when I was in school, and I won't say how long ago, the only way they could make electricity in that region of Massachusetts was oil. And we just had hit the oil embargo of, if I just give you away my time, 1972. So I just hit the oil embargo of 72 to 74. And so on a relative price basis, it made a lot of sense. You can do this. Okay.
Dr. Corradini, I will make the question, it's not a question, it's an answer, but I will make it in Spanish.
Oh, okay.
To use that.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. No hay duda que el desarrollo de conocimiento que usted ha presentado aquí resulta de gran importancia para el futuro del desarrollo de redes inteligentes, por ejemplo, en Costa Rica. La institución que yo represento, que es el Instituto Costarricense de Electricidad, le interesa contactar, conocer este tipo de investigaciones. Y aquí estamos un grupo de personas que estamos muy interesados en poder analizar la posibilidad de poder entrar en contacto con ustedes, analizar la posibilidad de hacer convenios de cooperación, porque las respuestas que ustedes tienen para una serie de preguntas que nosotros tenemos, hay una serie de preguntas que nosotros tenemos de las cuales ya ustedes tienen respuestas. Entonces, creo que es un buen momento. Nosotros siempre estamos ávidos, estamos abiertos a encontrar este tipo de posibilidades y no desaprovechamos la oportunidad para externarlo. A nosotros nos gustaría, tenemos inclusive una representante aquí de la Oficina de Cooperación Internacional, porque nos gustaría avanzar en este tema. Sabemos que lo que usted presentó hoy es muy específico, pero estamos seguros que dentro de toda esta ciencia hay respuestas para el desarrollo de innovación, de tecnología que Costa Rica necesita. Es nada más un comentario.
So I interpret your question to say you would like to find a way to collaborate. And the answer is absolutely. I will say that you're very kind to say I answered your questions, or some of your questions. I'm not an electrical engineer.
Okay.
But I do think that when Tom Johns helped me put together these slides, I guess I came away with 3 lessons. The first lesson is they do a lot of systems analysis initially to analyze the system. And they look for, the second thing is they look for some sort of example case where they could say, what if I did something here? What would be the benefit in reliability, right, and redundancy, and what would be the associated cost, okay? So I think the answer is we'd love to collaborate. That's half the reason, and the group is actually growing. We just had a new assistant professor join us from, I think he originally got his PhD from University of Mexico in Mexico City, but join us in chemical engineering of all ways, but he's a controls expert, and so he's looking at this dynamic distribution system as part of their team. So I think we'd love to collaborate, and we'll talk later. Okay. Going once, going twice.
Thanks, Dr. Codellini, for your presentation.
Celebrada en diciembre anterior en París, quedó en evidencia la necesidad de que todas las ideas en torno a la adaptación y la mitigación del cambio climático sean puestas en práctica a nivel internacional. Los 195 países que firmaron el acuerdo para reducir las emisiones globales y ayudar a que el mundo se adapte al cambio climático se comprometieron, como estoy seguro todas y todos ustedes lo saben, a alcanzar un pico mundial de emisiones de gases de efecto invernadero cuanto antes, a fin de intentar reducir el promedio global de incremento de temperatura. Los impactos asociados al cambio climático continuarán por cientos de años, aunque las emisiones de gases de efecto invernadero se detengan. El riesgo de cambios irreversibles y abruptos aumenta con la magnitud del incremento de temperatura, y en este sentido, los combustibles fósiles como el petróleo o el carbón crean emisiones de gases de efecto invernadero que contribuyen al calentamiento global. Por ende, es necesaria la búsqueda de nuevas alternativas limpias como son las energías renovables. Su uso es nuestra nueva responsabilidad social colectiva, no solo para con las personas, sino para con el planeta. Costa Rica es un país que se ha distinguido por la generación de electricidad basada mayoritariamente en fuentes renovables. Las múltiples iniciativas que hoy serán expuestas son fruto del esfuerzo a nivel nacional que se ha posicionado con los años en nuestra región y que contribuyen a fortalecer nuestro compromiso país a favor del medio y del desarrollo sustentable. Por este motivo es de trascendental importancia crear un espacio de discusión para exponer los distintos proyectos y esfuerzos que está realizando el país desde diferentes instituciones estatales, tales como la Universidad de Costa Rica, la Universidad Nacional, el Instituto Tecnológico de Costa Rica o el Instituto Costarricense de Electricidad. Para poder fomentar la creatividad, la innovación y la producción, es necesario socializar las iniciativas, pues esto además puede conseguir aliados estratégicos para su consecución óptima. Con este simposio, justamente, nuestro objetivo es poder evidenciar esfuerzos y casos exitosos en el aumento de la generación eléctrica a partir de fuentes renovables, que además son la vía para alcanzar la meta de ser un país carbono neutro en el año 2021. En este espacio universitario de estudios avanzados de la Universidad de Costa Rica, que como bien lo señalaba el doctor Pinto, denominamos como UCREA, es de vital importancia contar con los expertos Timothy Donohue, director del Centro de Investigación en Bioenergía de los Grandes Lagos en la Universidad de Wisconsin, y el doctor Michael Corradini, director del Instituto de Energía y del Instituto de Sistemas Nucleares de Wisconsin. Esto por cuanto su experiencia nos proporcionará una visión externa de lo que estamos haciendo en Costa Rica y de las opciones que tenemos para aprender de sus aciertos y errores. Esta es la mejor forma de transmitir el conocimiento, que es la herramienta de la academia para forjar criterios y preparar a nuestros futuros profesionales. Para la Universidad de Costa Rica es un honor contar con la presencia de los señores Donohue y Corradini, así como de los expertos de nuestras universidades estatales y del Instituto Costarricense de Electricidad. Estos intercambios son los que hacen crecer y evidencian nuestro compromiso con el desarrollo científico y tecnológico de nuestro país. Tenemos mucho potencial que se está gestando principalmente a nivel de la academia, y el camino por recorrer no es sencillo. Desde los Estados Unidos de América, la ruta trazada incluyó representantes de los sectores académico, industrial y gubernamental, y juntos lograron establecer la estrategia a seguir para fortalecer ese compromiso estatal. Aprovechemos esta oportunidad para aprender del conocimiento generado y sepamos mostrar a nuestros invitados lo mucho que Costa Rica puede aportar al desarrollo sostenible regional mediante la planificación y la gestión adecuada de los recursos. América Latina, tan desigual en tantos aspectos, requiere la intervención de personas, de grupos, de grandes colectivos, de instituciones y al final de cuentas de países que se comprometan a hacerla cada vez más equitativa, más justa y transparente. La ciencia y la tecnología tienen las herramientas para hacerlo, empezando por aquellas ideas que pueden surgir de espacios como este. Nuestro país es líder en la región y tenemos el potencial para escalar estos proyectos. Todo está en la mente, como quizás se refería Ramón y Cajal. No esperemos que las ideas se empolven, hagamos algo con ellas, pero procuremos que sea en función del bien común. Les deseo muchos éxitos en este simposio. Muy buenos días y muchas gracias.
Y de esta manera damos por inaugurado el Simposio de Energías Renovables. Le agradecemos al señor Rector en ejercicio, el doctor Carlos Araya Leandro, por su presencia y participación esta mañana. Don Carlos debe retirarse para seguir cumpliendo compromisos propios de su agenda. Nosotros continuamos con las charlas programadas y para ello le cedo nuevamente la palabra al doctor Adrián Pinto.
Muchas gracias. Es un honor para mí presentar la siguiente charla, una conferencia titulada From Field to Fuels and Chemicals, que será dictada por el doctor Timothy Donohue, quien es el director del Centro de Investigación en Bioenergía de los Grandes Lagos en Wisconsin, Estados Unidos. El doctor Donohue es director e investigador principal de este instituto en la Universidad de Wisconsin. Investiga las vías genéticas que utilizan los microorganismos para la generación de biomasa o biocombustibles a partir de luz solar. Ha ocupado 10 cargos de presidencia y dirección. Actualmente es director del Industrial Biotechnology and Bioenergy Alliance Board y del Norwich Research Park. Y este año cumplió su periodo como presidente de la Sociedad Americana de Microbiología, ASM. Ha recibido 8 premios y es miembro electo de la Academia para el Avance de la Ciencia de los Estados Unidos desde el 2009. Cuenta con más de 136 publicaciones en revistas indexadas. Además, fue editor de las revistas Microbiology y Biofuels y es revisor de varias revistas de gran relevancia como Nature, The Plant Cell, entre otras. Actualmente forma parte del consejo editorial de la revista Journal for Bacteriology y del comité ejecutivo del Instituto de Energía de Wisconsin. Agradecemos la presencia del doctor Donohue y le cedemos la palabra. Muchas gracias.
So let me just begin by thanking Adrian and the president of the university for joining us today, as well as all of the experts from the government and industry. It is an honor for me to be here representing my university and telling you about some of the things that are going on in Great Lakes Bioenergy. I have some old friends in this audience, and it's good to come down and connect with them. But it's also equally good, if not better, sorry Adrian, to connect and make new friends, because this is all a visit about making new friends as well and making new connections where we can work together to solve the grand societal problems that you heard about today. So what I'm going to do today is tell you about work that's been going on in Great Lakes Bioenergy and why we think this has been a successful model for doing sustainable conversion of plant biomass into fuels and chemicals. So since I'm an academic, this is the outline for my lecture. What I'm going to do today is try to introduce you to the scale and complexity of powering the energy grid and the efforts that are going on in my center and very briefly on the UW-Madison campus to diversify how we generate energy in the United States. I will use Great Lakes Bioenergy as a case study or an example of what we're doing. Mike will follow up and talk more about other non-biological energy generating systems. So as an introduction, Great Lakes Bioenergy is focused on converting the non-edible part of plant biomass into fuels and chemicals. By that, technically, that's called lignocellulosic biomass. That's different than the corn starch.
El Centro de Investigaciones en Estructuras Microscópicas, CIMIC, de la Universidad de Costa Rica, les da la más cordial bienvenida al Simposio de Energías Renovables. Este simposio se organiza en el marco de la iniciativa Espacio Universitario de Estudios Avanzados, UCREA. El saludo muy cordial esta mañana a las autoridades que nos acompañan, el señor Rector en ejercicio de la Universidad de Costa Rica, doctor Carlos Araya Leandro, al ingeniero José Francisco Aguilar Pereira, miembro del Consejo Universitario, al director del Centro de Investigaciones de Estructuras Microscópicas, CIMIC, doctor Adrián Pinto Tomás, y por supuesto a los expositores invitados, a todas y todos ustedes que nos acompañan. Iniciamos esta actividad con las palabras del director del Centro de Investigaciones en Estructuras Microscópicas, doctor Adrián Pinto Tomás.
Estimado rector en ejercicio, doctor Carlos Araya Leandro, estimado ingeniero José Francisco Aguilar, miembro del Consejo Universitario, estimado doctor Tim Donohue, director del Instituto de Ingeniería de los Grandes Lagos, estimado doctor Michael Radini, director del Instituto de Energía de Wisconsin, estimados conferencistas, estimado público presente acá en la sala, y también público que nos sigue a través de la internet, acá en Costa Rica y la región centroamericana. Muchas gracias por estar acá. Hoy tenemos una audiencia que representa los diferentes sectores de nuestro país. Tenemos 22 instituciones, acá entre las 100 personas que nos acompañan. Tenemos las 4 universidades públicas, la Universidad de Costa Rica, la UNA, la Universidad Nacional, el Instituto Tecnológico, la Universidad Estatal a Distancia. Tenemos también estudiantes de estas universidades. Tenemos un estudiante de Panamá, un estudiante que está en Stuttgart en este momento. Bueno, en este momento está en Costa Rica, pero no está el doctorado allá. Nos acompañan los directores del Simposio Energías Parte del Senat. Nos acompañan representantes también del Potencial, de Bienvenida, de Recope, del IEEE, empresas del sector energía, otras instituciones como la OET, el ICAP, por supuesto la Universidad de Wisconsin, y contamos también con el apoyo de la Cámara de Industrias. Además tenemos algunos agricultores y consultores independientes en la audiencia. Pues como pueden ver, es una audiencia bastante diversa, lo cual nos enorgullece y nos hace muy contentos, y también nos muestra que el tema de energía es un gran desafío, y es un desafío a todo nivel, a nivel del individuo, de las pequeñas decisiones que tomamos todos los días, a nivel de la universidad, nuestra comunidad, para muchos de los que estamos acá, a nivel del país y a nivel del planeta. Y un desafío de tal magnitud requiere de trabajo en equipo, no hay otra manera de resolverlo. Requiere de la participación del sector académico, requiere de la participación del gobierno, requiere de la participación del sector privado. Si no nos ponemos de acuerdo, no vamos a lograr salir adelante. Por fortuna tenemos representantes de todos estos sectores acá, así que vamos bien. Para estos grandes desafíos también se necesita un liderazgo, y la Universidad de Costa Rica, por su historia y su posición en la región, ha asumido este liderazgo ante grandes desafíos, y esa es la filosofía por la cual se creó el Espacio Universitario de Estudios Avanzados, UCREA por sus siglas, como un marco multi y transdisciplinario, innovador e internacional de investigación de alto nivel, con el objetivo general de dinamizar la organización y actividades de la UCR que le permitan asumir el liderazgo en el país y en la región. Les leo un fragmento de la resolución que creo el analista ambiental y consultor ambiental Agustín Rodríguez de la Cámara de Industrias, para que nos obligue a aterrizar, ¿verdad? Poner los pies en la tierra, y representando ese tercer componente de la triple hélice, gobierno, academia e industria, que tiene que unirse para trabajar en equipo para atacar este problema. Luego de las charlas tendremos un espacio para preguntas, pero la actividad se cerrará con una mesa redonda. Entonces, si por cuestiones de tiempo no pueden preguntar a algún expositor, por favor también tengan la confianza de acercarse a ellos en ambos cafés o el almuerzo, o de guardar su pregunta o realizarla durante la discusión de la mesa redonda. Es un auditorio, como vemos, que nos obliga a estar juntos. Esperamos una participación muy activa de ustedes, también como componentes de este trabajo en equipo. Sin duda, para lograr alcanzar nuestra meta de sostenibilidad energética, cada uno con motivación debe aportar sus capacidades y experticia como única estrategia para lograr este objetivo común. Si nos unimos, podemos salir adelante. Muchas gracias y espero que disfruten esta actividad.
Seguidamente, el mensaje del señor Rector en ejercicio, el doctor Carlos Araya Leandro.
Muy buenos días. El doctor Adrián Pinto, director del Centro de Investigación y Estructuras Microscópicas, ingeniero Francisco Aguilar, miembro del Consejo Universitario. Un cordial saludo y la bienvenida a nuestros invitados internacionales, el doctor Timothy Donohue, director del Centro de Investigaciones en Bioenergía de los Grandes Lagos en la Universidad de Wisconsin, y el doctor Michael Corradini, director del Instituto de Energía y del Instituto de Sistemas Nucleares de Wisconsin. Por supuesto, un cordial saludo a las y los expositores, a las investigadoras, investigadores, estudiantes que nos acompañan esta mañana, a todas y todos, muy buenos días. Al médico español Santiago Ramón y Cajal, conocido por compartir el Premio Nobel de Medicina a principios del siglo pasado por sus investigaciones en células nerviosas, se le atribuye la frase que dice: las ideas no duran mucho, hay que hacer algo con ellas. En este año que recién empieza, me gustaría que cada persona que forma parte de nuestra comunidad universitaria pudiera hacer suyas estas palabras. ¿Cuántas veces no somos nosotros mismos la principal barrera para pasar de la idea a la acción? Pero así como podemos autosabotear nuestras expectativas, también podemos tomar la decisión de llevar esas ideas a proyectos concretos. Así es como nacen grandes obras, desde acciones individuales e incluso desde países relativamente pequeños como el nuestro. En el Simposio de Energías Renovables que celebramos este día, daremos a conocer una serie de proyectos exitosos que han nacido gracias a una idea justamente. La semilla de cambiar el modelo de generación de energía hacia el uso de fuentes renovables germinó sin duda alguna en suelos áridos, poco favorables para el surgimiento de apoyos e iniciativas. Sin embargo, poco a poco más y más personas se han comprometido con esta idea y con ella han crecido robustos emprendimientos que nos acercan cada vez más a esta meta de sostenibilidad. Nuestro planeta está cambiando por causa de acciones que los seres humanos hemos emprendido desde el siglo XIX y somos nosotros y las futuras generaciones las que tendrán que aprender a convivir con estos cambios. Por ello, más que sentarnos a esperar las consecuencias de acciones pasadas, emprendimientos que favorezcan el desarrollo sostenible no solo velan por nuestro crecimiento, sino también por el bienestar de todo el planeta. En algún momento de la historia de la humanidad, la ciencia y la tecnología tuvieron increíbles avances orientados a la comodidad de las personas. Hoy no podríamos concebirlos en un enfoque de sostenibilidad que incluya todas las formas de vida con las que compartimos nuestro planeta y considerando prosperidad para las generaciones que vendrán. En la reciente 21ª Conferencia de las Partes
se crea el instituto, razonando por qué la Universidad de Costa Rica, la Rectoría dice que el desarrollo institucional de Costa Rica y sobre todo el propio desarrollo de la Universidad de Costa Rica se prestan para que en este país y en nuestra institución surja una iniciativa que procure generar espacios de estudio, pensamiento y elaboración de propuestas que partan de una perspectiva integradora hacia temas y problemas complejos de interés común en la región. Si nos están viendo en Centroamérica, esperamos que sí. Buenas noticias para todos. Es un esfuerzo integrador. De hecho, uno de sus objetivos es constituirse en un incubador de ideas, en el sentido de facilitar el pensar cosas que no han sido previamente pensadas. UCREA debe ser un lugar de encuentro y espacio de discusión e intercambio para el personal académico de la UCR, desbordando las actividades puramente disciplinarias, en interacción permanente con académicos y académicas de todo el mundo, con un ámbito temático igualmente abierto a las artes, las ciencias naturales, las humanidades y las ciencias sociales. El tema de energía es realmente un tema que atañe a todas estas áreas. Es en el marco de UCREA, entonces, donde se desarrolla esta actividad, que en palabras de la señora vicerrectora, si bien es cierto que en esta actividad los temas a tratar son puntuales, uno de los objetivos de este encuentro es sentar las bases para una discusión más amplia sobre el tema de energía, desde la UCR y a nivel nacional, respondiendo a una demanda propia del país, pero igualmente de cara a los retos del planeta y de los principios por un desarrollo inclusivo y sostenible. Que este sea el marco para acordar reuniones, coloquios de discusión y actividades similares en esta área. También, nos dice la vicerrectora, esperamos encontrar sinergias propias de las agendas de investigación que permitan iniciar proyectos conjuntos en el corto plazo. Desde el punto de vista logístico de la organización de esta actividad, contamos con el apoyo del CIEMIC, el Centro de Investigación en Estructuras Microscópicas, que es un centro multi y transdisciplinario con una historia muy amplia de cooperación, tanto a nivel nacional como internacional. Nosotros ponemos a disposición nuestra experiencia en investigación, cooperación internacional y equipo de alta tecnología para análisis ultraestructurales de materiales biológicos y no biológicos con potencial aplicación en generación de energías renovables. Es decir, estamos a su servicio de la comunidad nacional e internacional como un integrante más de este equipo para tratar de atacar este enorme desafío que es la sostenibilidad energética. Dentro de la organización, como decimos, en las trincheras de este evento, hemos contado con el apoyo de la Red para el Descubrimiento de Biomoléculas con Potencial Aplicación en Salud, Energía y Agricultura, red coordinada por la máster Catalina Murillo, la asistente de la red, Mariel Víquez, y otros componentes, estudiantes e investigadores de la red nos están apoyando y nos han apoyado en la realización de esta actividad. Así que sinceramente les agradezco por toda su ayuda. Esperamos que disfruten esta actividad. Hemos preparado un programa que nos permitirá conocer y discutir el panorama de investigación, tanto en Estados Unidos como en Costa Rica, en el área de energías renovables. Nuestros visitantes, el doctor Tim Donohue, el doctor Michael Corradini, dirigen institutos de energía en el estado de Wisconsin, pionero en estas investigaciones en la Unión Americana, y debido al éxito que han tenido en sus gestiones, ahora también son voces de autoridad en la estructura federal, es decir, en el gobierno de la Unión Americana. Gracias a su trabajo arduo y sus resultados, sus consejos son escuchados. La experiencia que ellos han tenido, la historia de sus centros, creo que será muy enriquecedora para nosotros el día de hoy. Tenemos también la presencia de investigadores de las universidades públicas, demostrando la investigación a alto nivel que se hace en nuestro país. Tenemos también la presencia de la institución líder en electricidad, no solo en Costa Rica, sino también en la región, el Instituto Costarricense de Electricidad, el IEEE. Tendremos su expositor y también su presencia en la mesa redonda que será moderada por